This may be an odd way to start a video, but let me ask you a question. When someone asks you what you look for in a game, what comes to mind? Now this may seem like a pointless exercise. You can't actually tell me your answer, but I can certainly guess. Entertaining combat, smooth controls, great graphics, larger-than-life boss battles, or even a vast open world to explore. Now let me take the time to introduce to you a little indie game called Omori. The title plays like a dated, stereotypical JRPG. You travel around with your party traversing a dungeon-like area or even a literal dungeon, all the while fighting off enemies. These battles typically don't require any thought besides mostly spamming basic attacks. It does attempt to spice things up with a few mechanics, but they definitely don't add anything unique or interesting. The title was made using RPG Maker, so the graphics certainly aren't anything to write home about in comparison to other titles. Although I will say the art style has a lot of charm to it. The boss battles are enjoyable, but due to the constraints of the gameplay, many of them feel the same. Even the menus are pretty dated. If I fast forward through this talk about gameplay, the conclusion I'm getting at is, there isn't a single interesting or innovative mechanic in the entire game. Zilch, zip, nada. I said stereotypical JRPG, and I meant it. All those things I mentioned that people tend to look for in a game, Omori is only average, or even below average at them. However, despite all of this, Omori is an exceptional and unique experience. Whenever talking about a game, we tend to get lost in the discussion about combat, exploration, level design, and graphics, you know, the more gamey aspects of video games. That's because for a lot of titles, that's all there really is to discuss. Their stories are relegated to a mere excuse to get the player from one area to another, but there exist other games where this isn't the case, where the narrative takes center stage and everything else pays tribute to it. That's exactly the kind of game Omori is. Everything is done in service to this one central goal, and true to that statement, the story is one of the best in any game I've ever played. However, it's not just the tale itself that is so stunningly good, it's the emotion the title manages to invoke out of you. Now every game manages to make you feel something. The adrenaline rush from beating a challenging boss, the eureka moment when figuring out the answer to a puzzle, or even the tension and anxiety featured in something like Resident Evil. I'm not arguing that these are less valuable than what Omori offers, just that it's more common. I'm very rarely truly invested in the main cast or plot of a game, simply because the writing is either subpar or so unimportant that it might as well be non-existent. That makes what Omori manages to achieve all the more impressive. This title will take you to highs as you endlessly giggle at the pure absurdity of the events the characters are partaking in. Even just walking around an area and talking to NPCs will more often than not get a light chuckle out of you. The antics the main cast gets up to, and honestly just the tone the game sets, is entirely whimsical. This is accompanied by a feeling of safety and warmth as you adventure around with your best friends. No matter what struggles you may face on the road ahead, you'll always have each other to lean on and offer support. Everyone may be their own individual, but each piece is a part of one greater whole that is their bond with one another. The player feels this connection, and actively grows attached to the main cast as if they are your own friends. Although this game isn't just all sunshine and rainbows, Omori may be filled to the brim with plenty of happy and humorous scenes, but always lurking, just beneath the surface, is an onslaught of fear, depression, and anxiety. Omori at its core is a psychological horror game. Based on how I've been describing it so far, that may come as a shock. I wouldn't say the title is scary, perhaps a better term would be unsettling. Usually I found the darker moments to be more intriguing than anything else, mainly because they're linked to the mystery shrouding the title's plot. However, feeling anxious or perturbed isn't the only negative emotion Omori manages to bring out. The player will be invested in the main cast, and when you see them struggling to deal with their inner demons, or the group you've grown so fond of is in turmoil, you'll hurt with them. I can't possibly put into words the level of emotion this game will bring out of you. Unless you're an emotionless shell like myself, I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of players were in tears by the end. This story-driven philosophy goes so far that Omori feels like a story using the video game medium rather than a video game with a solid story. What I'm trying to say is, the narrative behind this game and the way it uses video game mechanics to further engross the player in its plot is remarkable. So much so that any problems with the gameplay get completely overwritten by the sheer quality of everything else that the game attempts. With a story so powerful and moving moving, you'll be thinking about it days after the credits roll. I've only vaguely alluded to just what exactly this emotional roller coaster will put you through. And that's because much like any thrill-inducing ride, the first experience is special. The game can only be experienced for the first time once. It doesn't help that a significant portion of its appeal is the mystery of just what exactly is going on. Having all the answers immediately deeply damages the experience, so much so that I would recommend turning off this video if you haven't played the game. If anything I've said previously sounds interesting to you, I would recommend purchasing the title and trying it for yourself. Then you can always come back later and watch this video, you know, as a thanks for introducing you or something. Alright, so I guess this is my spoiler warning. From here on out the gloves are coming off and anything goes. You've been warned. Welcome to White Space. As you take the time to orient yourself, you'll discover there isn't much to see. There are only 6 things to interact with, and most of them don't serve any real purpose. Besides the immediate starting area, everything else is an endless white void. The opening tells us that we've been living here for as long as we can remember, although a tiny enclosed room with only a laptop, tissue box, and sketchbook to serve as entertainment doesn't exactly fit the term living. More like a place to exist rather than thrive. Taking a look at the game's presentation, you can already see Omori setting its tone. The character model is designed to be cute. Having a head the size of the rest of his body, no mouth, and big eyes communicates this effectively enough. In contrast, besides a single stroke of red, all of White Space is entirely black and white, commonly used to give something a more negative aura. To further push this image along, the sketchbook is filled with odd and somewhat disturbing images of who knows what exactly. Examining the tissue box shows its use is for wiping away your sorrows. To top it all off, once you finish investigating, a knife falls from the sky. The music playing in the background helps with setting the mood as well. The theme, aptly called White Space, is a calming little melody. It's simple, but invokes a feeling of safety, as if everything is going to be okay. What I'm getting at here is this strange feeling of unease. There's nothing that could harm you in this area, but that doesn't stop you from feeling as if something isn't quite right here. There isn't much time to think about it though. Equipped with a knife, the door sitting at the edge of your little safety blanket is now openable. Immediately, a complete shift occurs from the bleak reality of your former home. The music becomes far more upbeat, and the room is overflowing with color. There's even a rainbow stairwell. In the center sits a group of 3 kids: Aubrey, Hiro, and Kel. Remember those friends I was speaking about not too long ago? Well, here they are. Aubrey immediately introduces herself by shouting your character's name, which just so happens to be Omori. Without wasting any time, you're thrown directly into the group. Kel and Aubrey don't exactly see eye to eye on many things, and the friends are reliant on Hiro to try and mediate between the children's petty squabbles. You can already begin to see the fledglings of who these characters are. Aubrey is a sweetheart, but she can be just as pushy as Kel when she wants to be. Both lack in the maturity department, although one is worse off than the other. Hiro is Kel's older brother, but he's more like the dad of the group, always having to placate the two of them and be the one to bring a more adult perspective. After helping find Aubrey's stuffed toy, the group heads off to go and meet up with the other 2 members of this inner circle, Mari and Basil. Mari can best be described as a cheerful, playful girl that's always looking out for the people she loves. Basil is a bit more timid than the others, drowned out by the more vibrant members of the cast, only speaking up once Mari brings him to the forefront of the conversation. Despite that, you can tell he cherishes the time he spends with the group, taking the time to photograph all the precious memories everyone has with each other and keeping them safely stored away in his photo album. With each member introduced, Omori takes some time to show off these pictures. I'm not going to go into the details of the album. I'll just focus on what it and everything leading up to this has been trying to achieve. Omori desperately needs the player to become invested in the main cast, to feel the strength of the group's bond and understand that this is something worth caring about. You see all of the happy moments the group shares, and it further pushes the idea into your mind. I'm sure Basil's in-character reason for taking pictures of people when they least expect it is sound, but there's another reason why the game has him do this. By capturing moments when people are just being themselves, you get a much more natural perspective of who they are and how they interact with others, creating a stronger image of the friend group than all of them just posing in various pictures together. The photo album isn't the only way the game achieves this though. The entire Prologue's purpose is to achieve this goal. The hide-and-seek game featured shortly after has Omori playing the Seeker. His friends know he hates to be alone, so Kel takes one for the team and allows himself to immediately get caught, even calling out to you if you somehow miss him. It appears even Kel has a soft and caring side for his friends. Heading south, you reach Basil's flower garden, which even further cements this idea. He's planted a flower patch for each member of the group with a flower that's meant to represent them. Hearing his explanation of how each flower symbolizes a member of the cast adds even more character to them. Basil may have been a bit shy initially, but here he demonstrates a very strong passion for his friends. I steady cherish them, and if this doesn't epitomize that, then I don't know what else does. This entire section is incredibly charming, and when factored in with a photo album and your friend's general antics, you can't help but feel this group is something special. This only makes the alarm of Basil freaking out over a mysterious picture he isn't familiar with and the instant teleport back to white space only more shocking. Made even worse once the player realizes the door to neighbor's room is missing and there's no escape from this void. At first, your gaming instincts kick in. There has to be some way to advance, so you go around inspecting every item. With each passing object offering nothing new, you start to grow curious. What is it that the game wants me to do? Miwo, the cat in the room, will offer a vague hint, saying that there is one way to escape. You'll most likely stumble about a little longer until you open the menu. It's kind of odd, knowing that a single word can hold so much weight to it. The implications behind it so heinous and gruesome. But hey, you wanted a way to progress, and here it is. You might hesitate, give everything one final glance over until you're faced with the uncomfortable reality. You want to move further, right? Well then this cute, weak boy you just finished getting to know has got to die. Omori doesn't start out scary or anxiety-inducing. The first image you'll ever see is of a boy crying and being told everything will be okay. The title is currently a blank slate, and it needs to leave an impression. White space feels unnatural, almost alien, but at the very least, it isn't hostile. You're even given time to acclimate, providing a very basic sense of safety to combat the unease. With this initial setting of tone out of the way, the player is then blindsided by all of Headspace. It butters you up with a beautiful friendship, a happy playground inhabited by a bunch of friendly NPCs, charming music, and a colorful, vibrant world, perfectly contrasting the practically empty room that is white space. So much so that you may even forget about the area entirely, too enwrapped in the whimsical adventures of youth, only for it to abruptly slam down the reminder that this is indeed a horror game. Omori lulls you into a false sense of security, believing everything is happy-go-lucky fun. However, the alien nature of white space wasn't that long ago, and you're a sucker for buying into the ruse. There are two ways Omori will handle its darker half. One is through the sudden tonal shift after long periods of joyful bliss. The purpose here is to force some anxiety and tension onto the player, to make you feel safe, only to then violently rip that away from you. You're left reeling from this sharp turn, and then the game blasts you with even more when you haven't fully recovered. This is an incredibly effective strategy that the title nails every time, never failing to invoke the exact emotions it wants you to feel. The second is making the dark transition obvious. This is usually done through either a gradual shift from lighthearted to off-putting, or making the turn abrupt but then purposely slowing things down. This method is utilized when the title isn't trying to frighten you, but instead make the player feel intrigued or slightly uncomfortable, using the more rare moments of horror to add an extra level of importance and weight behind the information being learned. That's not to discount the imagery used, which is often disturbing, psychologically abusing the player. This second method always succeeds in grabbing the player's attention. Omori is often vague about its narrative, not wanting you to figure out the mystery before it is revealed. This extra oomph can help turn exposition that doesn't provide as many answers as the player may like into something gripping, but also perturbing. Both versions of horror are utilized well in Omori. The game follows a basic general structure that will become obvious as the video goes on. What this means is you'll come to expect when the spooky times will come front and center. This is detrimental to the initial strategy because it relies heavily on its shock factor. To combat this, when you start to notice the structure the title follows, it changes gears, no longer trying to scare you, but instead relying on dark imagery and the player's curiosity to get the job done. Omori also abuses this pattern by once again creating a sense of security. Nothing bad will happen until I reach this point, except then it breaks that rule and throws you for a loop. I really like how Omori handles its horror. When it's trying to frighten you, it goes all in, creating a powerful atmosphere through music, visuals, and pacing that makes you feel real anxiety. When it knows that card trick won't work anymore, the game then tries to make you as uncomfortable as possible, which elicits an entirely new type of emotion, further enhancing the experience. These two in combination leave the player in the dark. They don't know what to expect, but regardless they'll be feeling some type of horror that doesn't disappoint. Throughout this entire video, all I've taken the time to talk about are the events. Despite Omori being story-centric, it's still a game. The gameplay is fairly basic at first, and its core mechanics are introduced alongside walking through the flower garden. You learn about the emotion system, which plays like a game of rock, paper, scissors. There are 3 in total: happy, which raises crit chance and speed but lowers hit rate; anger increases the damage you do but also how much you take; and sad, which raises defense but lowers attack. The reason for the rock, paper, scissors analogy is each emotion is strong and weak against another. If a target is angry, a happy party member will deal more damage to them. Likewise, if a party member is sad and a foe is angry, they'll deal more damage to that character. The friends who actually inhabit your party of 4 are Omori, Hiro, Kel, and Aubrey. In the beginning, everything is pretty basic. Omori is your source of sadness, Aubrey makes people happy, and Kel induces rage in others. As you may have guessed, this isn't exactly coincidental. Kel is naturally annoying, Aubrey is the cheerful girl who stays true to her values, and the silent, monochromatic Omori is great at bringing on the depression. Hiro doesn't have any specific emotions centered around him. True to the rose analogy Basil uses, he doesn't represent any one emotion and is instead the charismatic support of the group. The final mechanic introduced is the energy system. Each time the party takes 1 damage, they'll gain 1 energy. This allows them to perform team-up moves with other members of the party if they spend their turn performing a normal attack. If a skill is used, this opportunity isn't available. These collaborative actions tend to coincide with the relationship the attacker has with the other friend you choose to interact with. For instance, the 2 brothers bounce Kel's ball around, allowing them to dunk on every enemy at once. I'm not going to get into my exact thoughts about the gameplay right here. I'll talk about it periodically as more skills are introduced and the gameplay becomes more complex. What I do want to say is, I think the energy and emotion mechanics played really well with the focus on the narrative. This is a highly emotional game, and having that be a core element of combat adds an entire other layer to the experience. If you haven't already guessed, one of the central themes of Omori is the value of friendship. Having your party members interacting with unique character-specific battle combinations always manages to further enhance a relationship. Even the skills characters have are true to their nature. Hiro is the oldest member that the group relies on for guidance. In turn, he plays the support role. Omori brandishes a knife, and his abilities focus on emotionally abusing or taking advantage of foes. With the discussion about gameplay coming to a close, at least for now, let's transition back to the events. After stabbing yourself in white space, you wake up to find yourself not in some friendly, happy-go-lucky reality, but instead in a dark, unsettling, empty house. It turns out your character isn't actually named Omori, but is instead a normal, non-monochromatic boy named Sunny. I've spoken about tone before, especially in regards to how white space does a great job introducing it. The events so far have only further pushed the point, with the juxtaposition between the pleasant environment inside Sunny's headspace versus the cold, cruel bite of reality. Omori, who we can safely assume is meant to be Sunny's representation in the dream world, hates to be alone. Yet when he wakes up, there's no one around. His tight-knit friend group isn't anywhere to be seen. Even his mother is gone. The dream world is a wonderful, carefree environment of security and warmth. Its color palette is vibrant and inviting, the music upbeat and playful. It's a place anyone could lose themselves in while endlessly adventuring with their second family. In contrast, Sunny's home is unnerving. The sound playing in the background is this odd, static noise, and there's darkness teetering just on the edge of your surroundings, threatening to overcome you at any moment. The entire house is covered by a dark hue, and besides Sunny himself, everything feels a bit lifeless. The game is yet again repeating the cycle. Think of this upstairs section as white space. There's not much to do, but despite the atmosphere, nothing can hurt you. There are no jump scares or fear-inducing scenery to find. Sunny seems to suffer from acrophobia, so the only option available is to go back to sleep. Only this time, you don't awaken in white space. You're greeted by a corrupted version of the home you just left, with a sinister red light emanating from the window. This time, all other pathways are blocked, and the only other option is to traverse the unknown abyss. With a dark tentacle-like hand rising from the endless flight, Sunny starts to be surrounded. Whispers emanate from all around, and after a brief turnaround to check that nothing is behind him, he continues forward, only for his worst fear to materialize. The boy is blissfully unaware, unwilling to stop his descent due to his overwhelming hunger. With the heartbeat in the background steadily growing faster and faster, the appendage overtakes him. The image that appears for this encounter is the embodiment of Sunny's fear, a tall stairwell leading to a dark unknown, enhanced even further by the disturbing expression. Long, disgusting hands pour out from the monster, highlighting the fear of something causing him to fall to his doom. Even the monster's attacks focus on this, with the fiend shoving Sunny Sunny down the stairs to deal damage. You feel completely helpless while facing this foe. Attacking has no effect at all, and the damage begins to pile up, epitomizing what it feels like to be overtaken by one's fears. With each passing turn, it feels as if the boy will falter, unable to put this demon to rest, only for a small voice to ring out in the back of Sunny's mind, providing him a feeling of comfort, encouraging him to face this fear and overcome it. With newfound resolve, the boy calms himself and the screen fades to black. I think it's safe to assume that Sunny didn't just sleepwalk his way down the stairs. This entire sequence represents his struggle with overcoming his fears, the beginning serving as the dread one would feel knowing they have no choice but to face their phobia. The stairs in the real world aren't endless, but to a kid with a deep-rooted irrational fear, they may as well be. The hands taking the form of the terror one would feel from potentially falling, a perfect imagining of the panic a person feels when faced with something that terrorizes them. This is an example of the first method Omori uses to frighten its players. The atmosphere of the house is unnerving, putting you on edge, except there isn't anything here no matter where you look. You feel relieved, and just when you think it's safe, that darkness engulfs you. One moment you're returning to the safety of your bed, and the next you're facing a demonic stairwell. In order to make the experience more powerful, the game relies on this ignorance. You feel some of Sunny's terror not just because of the great presentation, but because of your own fear of the unknown. Questions popping into your head. Why am I here? What is this endless flight of stairs, and why are their hands just waiting to assault me? Finally making it to the bottom isn't just a relief for Sunny, but for the player as well. They've left the nightmare and returned to normalcy. While the worst is over for now, and not everything is returning back to sunshine and rainbows. A constant banging noise will start to echo throughout the house, pounding incessantly. Venturing to the front door, it turns out the source of the noise is Mari, saying she forgot her keys and asking you to let her inside. Here the player is given their first choice. They can either open the door for her or rudely go back to sleep. The far more interesting option is opening the door, so let's go with that. Sunny seems a bit hesitant, and for good reason, because the creature behind this door certainly isn't the girl we're familiar with. You don't get a great glimpse at first, but if you head to the bathroom and look in the mirror, you can stare at the abomination for as long as you like. So let's take a step back and analyze what this all means. Clearly something is up with Mari. Going all the way back to Basil's freakout, he utters her name, implying she has something to do with the sudden change in him. When answering the door in the real world, there's this ghastly version of her. She only appears in the mirror if you open the door, implying that perhaps this creature has followed you inside. If you're like me, you couldn't help but begin to speculate here. Mari is the only friend in the dream world that refuses to leave the picnic blanket. She also guards the save point and essentially acts as the checkpoint system for the game. She even supplies various treats to heal your party. Her personality is like that of a mother, helping you in the game of hide and seek, and later on supplying a list of all the side quests you've taken on. Even her dialogue, hope to have helped just a little and I'll be here if you need me, makes you feel like you can rely on her. Confronted by these contradicting versions of her, I couldn't help but think that this tender front was just an act, that Mari was actually a villainous character, a wolf in sheep's clothing. After facing Ghost Mari, Sunny heads back to bed and we find ourselves back in the familiar void that is white space. On the surface, nothing has changed, except now when opening the laptop, you're greeted by the Hangman game. Throughout the entirety of Headspace are keyboard keys, each labeled by a certain letter in the alphabet. Typical for any game of Hangman, it's your job to spell out the message at the bottom, with each incorrect letter leading to more lines being drawn. There will technically be an overarching goal for the party to accomplish while traversing the dream world, but you never really make any progress on it. This stasis is actually one of my few issues with the game, however that's a discussion for another time. The keys try to remedy this by acting as a secondary goal that permeates throughout all of Headspace, although they don't do a very effective job, mainly because you don't know what the end goal is. Finding Basil means reuniting the friend group, but what awaits after finding these keys is completely unknown. You don't know what you're striving towards, so collecting another letter that adds to the message doesn't feel all that rewarding. In order to combat this, each correct letter will leave a crack in the ground, showing the player some kind of vague hint about the mystery of what's plaguing Sunny. This helps balance the horror element by introducing brief moments in between long periods of blissful adventure. I like the symbolism as well, representing the darkness leaking into the dream. Also, Omori is the only one that can pick them up, making them seem like an invading presence that doesn't belong. My issue is these hints are so vague, they might as well not exist. You aren't gaining any new insights, and the majority of them aren't even thought-provoking. These eyes staring back at you don't offer much besides okay, that was a thing that happened, let's move on. I don't want there to be any misconceptions. I don't dislike the keys, but when they're used as a way to give the player a sense of progression, they fall completely flat. Alright, so I've run out of points to endlessly chatter on about, so let's move forward with the plot. Omori leaves Whitespace, and a similar scene from when you first left the area unfolds. Basil and yourself had disappeared, and the entire group was worried about both your safety, especially Mari, who runs at you with a hug and seems more relieved than anyone else that you've returned. The reason for this is revealed not too long after when the game informs you that Mari is your older sister. I like how the game goes about doing this. They aren't in your face about it, and they reveal it after the entire house sequence in order to put a focus on her. Considering she plays a far less active role than most of the other members of the group, I think this was a wise decision. Mari is more important than just the cheerful picnic girl who you only talk to once at each checkpoint. With the brief reunion over, there's still one big issue. Basil hasn't returned, and the children are more than just a little concerned. They visit his home in hopes of finding him, and those are quickly squashed. Undeterred, the group of children decide to search for him in the vast forest. This is the first real dungeon of the game, and in turn is pretty basic. Most of the forest is just the group wandering around the practically empty area with a few enemies and trees to fill out the space. Despite this, there are two rooms worth mentioning. One is the appearance of something in the room with a tree and tire swing. This isn't the first time the game has shown this figure. It appears in the sketchbook, can be found hovering over the water to the north, and its outline can be seen on the door when looking in the mirror. Usually the creature vanishes as quickly as it appeared, accompanied by a distressing noise clip. Whatever this thing is, it won't be going away anytime soon, popping up frequently throughout the dream world, serving as the game's other main mechanism of keeping the horror elements lurking just beneath the surface. You won't have any idea what this thing means for quite some time, so there's no point in talking about it now. Something to consider is why it shows up where it does. Basil's home and the ocean don't really provide any substantial hints, but the one in the vast forest does. If you take a moment to look at just where the thing appears, it's over the tire swing. Now what exactly does this seemingly ordinary child's plaything remind you of? I'll leave it to your imagination. The other area worth discussing is the train station. There's nothing the station does that's all that noteworthy. The only thing I want to mention is how it acts as the precursor to the upbeat, humorous nature that is the rest of Headspace. The main way this is handled is through NPC dialogue, which Omori handles exceptionally well. Talking to everyone you meet in any given location is synonymous with video games, but the trope is especially prevalent in JRPGs, usually used to give an area or a person a bit more character. This in turn helps make the world feel less like a static collection of rooms and more like a place these people inhabit. The problem, at least for me, is the vast majority of NPC dialogue is pointless filler that doesn't accomplish this goal, or the writing isn't strong enough to make me care. Omori sidesteps this issue entirely. It's not as if the dream world has incredibly detailed lore, that isn't necessary. Its strength lies in each character's writing. More specifically, they are a gold mine of comedy. Let me give you a couple of examples. In the train station, there's a sprout mole who gets offended when Kel calls him an ugly plant creature. The mole plant then corrects him, saying they are highly intelligent creatures who lose all sense of themselves when they get lost. Then the mole realizes they are indeed lost and attacks the party. There's a leaf who offers one of the first side quests. The foliage absolutely despises bunnies for reasons that aren't exactly clear, but the way the game delivers this message is done quite well. Even the art style contributes by making most NPCs strange but humorous looking creatures, similar to a child's imaginary friend. If I'm being entirely honest, these brief moments aren't anything great on their own. They'll most likely only get a light chuckle out of you, but when this happens consistently throughout an entire game, it becomes something worth pointing out. I never once experienced the NPC dialogue burnout I mentioned previously, and I think that deserves some praise. You might be getting tired of me saying this, but yet again it helps set the mood the game is trying to achieve. Adventuring around Headspace is supposed to be filled with fun exploits that clear your mind away from the horrors. Getting a good laugh at the absurdity of these NPCs really helps with achieving that goal. After traversing the entirety of the vast forest, the group realizes Basil is nowhere to be found. They return back to Mari, and Sunny, having already faced his acrophobia earlier, has no qualms traveling up this ridiculously long ladder to Otherworld. So this is where the game finally lets go of your hand and allows you to explore an area. There's an entire town that offers a couple side tasks, and a few offshoot areas from the junkyard which functions as the area's main dungeon. Vast Forest primarily serves as a tutorial so the player is comfortable balancing exploration, collecting items, and fighting enemies, with Burley's Tetherball acting as the main introduction to how side quests will be handled. Although besides a few offshoot rooms, times, there isn't anything to do besides run straight through the forest. I felt this hand-holding was unnecessary. Every section of the map will have its own story, and while the forest is short, it holds no relevance at all. The level design is basic, functioning as a long hallway with some trees to block your path. The flower garden tutorial was serviceable enough. Did we really need this? Why couldn't the group have gone straight to Otherworld instead of wasting time in this pointless forest? Moving back to the new location, this is easily the most lighthearted the game is ever going to get. The entire section is filled with more absurdity than I probably have time to mention. Tiny award-winning centaurs moonwalking to the sound of disco music, fighting a crashing window from classic Windows, a lovesick space pirate captain, knockoff Kool-Aid men trying to sell you things, the list just goes on. There's even a jacked version of Pluto, the planet by the way. After helping him achieve his freedom from the pirates chasing him, the dwarf planet goes on to follow his dream of running his own transportation service. So yeah, Pluto becomes the fast travel of the game. I'm not quite sure how you could listen to all that and not think Omori is just pure absurdity at this point. I had a consistent smile plastered across my face while making my way through this entire section, constantly chuckling or at times even full on laughing at the antics of the game. Omori's story is pretty heavy, tackling some pretty dark topics. Constantly exposing the player to this would be mentally draining or damage the impact. There needs to be in-between moments where the title hits the brakes. That's where Otherworld and the portions like it come in. They allow you to recover and make the more serious moments maintain their narrative impact. It helps that a lot of effort was put in to really drive home the silly adventurous nature of the dream. Little details like the music speeding up when chasing down the Sprout Mall, or the boss taking the moment to change the music from something silly to his more epic theme. This is part of what I meant by Omori using the video game medium to enhance the story, taking the interactive and visual nature of games to make the player feel a certain way. You lose yourself in the madness, forcing the darkness back into the abyss where it belongs. I think that's enough gushing for now though. Outside of all the charming moments, there's an actual plot here. Space Boyfriend, that pirate captain I mentioned, has had his heart broken and is feeling the post-relationship blues. His special mixtape is missing, and after some coercing from Aubrey, the group decides to help the pirate crew look for it in the junkyard. While traversing the area, a new mechanic is introduced. The party can tag one another, placing the chosen friend at the front of the line. This allows them to use their specific abilities. Omori can use his knife to destroy traffic cones, Aubrey uses her baseball bat to obliterate objects Omori can't quite handle, Kel can throw a projectile at a target, and Hiro uses his overwhelming charisma to talk people into assisting them. These skills themselves aren't really all that interesting. They never gain any kind of complexity throughout the entire game besides Kel being able to learn how to aim his throws. I wouldn't say they're a mark against the game, but it would have been nice to see a little more expansion on these abilities. What I do like is the tag system introduced. Whenever you tag a party member, you get a nice little photo showing how the leading character chose to tag the new leader. The moments themselves are cute and add even more personality and depth to the party, making the group of friends feel more relatable and endearing. To further contribute to this feeling are little hangout spots scattered around the world. On their own, not much actually happens during these scenes. The one in the junkyard just has the kids sitting around staring at the moon. Instead, their strength lies in the quantity of them. Think of it like each encounter slightly chipping away at you. You see the party fishing, drinking some tea, playing cards, watching a movie, exercising together, and many more. These are all everyday actions any friend group would do with one another. Seeing it once is kind of but consistently watching these children have fun or just relaxing in each other's presence has an effect on you. You aren't just told these four are close friends, but you get to see it for yourself. That's what makes the bond between them all so special. It genuinely feels real and natural, so you can't help but get invested in them. Transitioning back to Otherworld, after chasing down a Sprout Mall obsessed with a celebrity named Sweetheart who also just so happened to be the woman who broke Space Boyfriend's heart, you get the mixtape. You return back to the captain, only for him to be enraged by the music playing from his boombox, causing him to engage the party. I think this is a good time to bring gameplay back to the forefront of the discussion. Omori gets most of its complexity from the addition of new abilities party members learn. Omori and Aubrey are the damage dealers of the group, while Kel is a mixture of support and damage. I already mentioned that Hiro is firmly planted in the support category. At the current moment, these skills limit the party to one central strategy that I have dubbed the happy strategy. Basically, it involves making your party happy and the enemy angry. Taking a peek at the emotion chart shows the happy counters the other feeling. The Space Boyfriend fight has the boss becoming permanently angry towards the beginning of the battle. Although this isn't the reason why the happy strategy is so effective. Based on the skills you get, it's in your best interest to employ the same tactic on every boss for a considerable length of the game. Let me explain why. One of the first side quests you can obtain rewards rewards you with an item that, when equipped, has the character starting with the happy emotion in every fight. You don't get the other emotions' respective items until much later in the game. Aubrey, Kel, and Omori can each change the emotions of one target in battle, but Aubrey gains the ability to make herself and another target happy at level 11, which is where you'll be hovering around at this point in the game. Finally, Omori gains the skill Trick around this point as well, which allows him to lower the attack stat of an angry foe by 2 stages and deal damage. Combining all these factors together makes it pretty obvious that the game wants you to employ a certain strategy. Angry lowers defense but increases attack. Trick allows the party to offset the attack gain so the foe is only suffering from the negative defense loss. You can make 3 out of your 4 party members happy on the first turn, and easily make a foe angry through Kel's Annoy skill. So now you have increased speed, an emotion advantage against the enemy, and remove the benefits they achieve from that emotion. Yeah, sounds incredibly effective now, doesn't it? It's obvious to me that Omori does this to specifically give the player an easy out to the space boyfriend fight in case they're struggling. Grind to level 11 if you haven't already, and then just wreck the poor guy. The boss fight itself feels like the game's way of gatekeeping you into understanding the emotion system. Enemy encounters themselves are insanely tedious, not requiring you to use emotions at all. Simply attacking until they're all dead is serviceable enough. I won't hold this against the game too much because most JRPGs have this problem. Where I will look down on the game is its boss fights. While the standard encounters for most titles of this genre aren't particularly great, the boss fights tend to be much more interesting, usually having a unique gimmick that requires the player to use trial and error to learn how to overcome the obstacle. Omori doesn't really have this, at least not until the special endgame super bosses. The problem with the happy strategy is it works for every fight up until the final boss of the next section. That means every mini-boss and boss encounter allows you to utilize the same tactic over and over again without fail. Heck, you could still use it on that boss and it would work just fine. Once you reach a certain level, the happy strategy evolves into the angry strategy where you do the exact same thing, only this time it's even more effective. While I wouldn't say I stopped enjoying the boss fights altogether, I do wish the game improved upon its variety and strategies. Trying to be a little more positive about the Captain Boss battle, the music is stunning and the comic book-like art style looks absolutely amazing as well. Even if I felt the fight was a little too easy, I still enjoyed jamming out and admiring the art style. After calming the captain down, he reverts back to his more rational self and informs the party he has no idea who or where Basil may be. Yeah, did you forget we were supposed to be looking for Basil? 'Cause I sure did. Defeated, the group heads back, only to encounter a shadow version of the flower-loving boy. It seems the rest of the group can't see him, and once you enter the area he walks off toward, they disappear altogether. It's here where the bottled up darkness finally breaks through. All the pleasant, comical NPCs are cast aside, and the friends who always look out for you are gone. It's just you, a maze, and this shadow figure that seems to be leading you towards something. Along the way you can catch brief glimpses of moments that seem to have no relation with one another or anything you've seen before. A cake where an unknown person wonders what to wish for, and someone talking about watermelons being the best part of summer. Not quite sure that I agree with that, but hey, I don't judge. For now, there isn't a whole lot to say about these, and even watching the short clips is entirely optional. All I will mention is many of them have this nice, quaint feeling. The stranger leads you to a barn that wasn't accessible earlier. Inside is a seemingly ordinary portrait if you don't count its size. Venturing into said portrait, you'll immediately feel a sense of unease. The area is overwhelmingly black, and the music changes drastically into this dark and foreboding theme. Nothing happens immediately as you travel down the hallway, but as you reach the end, that tire swing rears its ugly head. Yet again, it's strange the amount of power this single piece of imagery holds. All the implications by simply hanging some rope from the ceiling, the questions it raises, and the darkness it holds. You can take your time to drink it all in. It's merely a piece of rope. It can't hurt you. There's also a music stand and a picture of what appears to be a happy family. A father, mother, daughter, and a little baby boy. There aren't many families we've seen that can fit this image. In fact, only one comes to mind. The final object in the room is one of the keys. Collecting it blocks out the faces of every person in the portrait except for the little girl. You yet again can take all the time you want to stare and wonder what this new imagery means. Once you've taken it all in, Omori has no choice but to retreat, only this time something isn't going to let you have your way. It materializes as soon as you turn your back, and immediately rushes towards you, flashing very briefly an image of Basil being consumed by some dark monster. You are immediately transported back to white space where you yet again have no choice but to stab yourself. This chain of events raises more and more questions. What were all of those little scenes, and what significance did they have? Why was there a noose hanging from the ceiling, and why was the little girl the only person not scratched out? Well, the game doesn't have any answers for you at this moment, so in turn, neither do I. What this does do, besides having the dark elements of the game resurface, is make the narrative feel like there's some overarching goal that we're working towards. All we have is Headspace, and it doesn't feel like we're really making a whole lot of progress on whatever the actual plot of the game is. Everything has been exceedingly entertaining so far, but helping Space Boy find his mixtape doesn't exactly connect to any of the interesting developments so far. With this short sequence, a few small crumbs are thrown the player's way in order to give them something to think about and keep the overarching narrative relevant, whatever that may be. With that little tangent over, Sunny awakens, only for it now to be daytime. You can listen to a call from your mother explaining that you're moving away in a few days, and Kel, your old friend, has been trying to get in touch with Sunny for some time. Not too long after, someone is yet again knocking at the door, and true to the mother's message, our boy Kel is on the other side. When you open the door, this time there aren't any spooky jump scares, although what is on the other side may prove just as startling. Kel, have you been on some growth hormones? Dude, you look like a basketball player, and why does your face look so much older? I mean, Sunny looks relatively the same. Alright, getting to the point. Shockingly, your 12-year-old friend is now a 16-year-old teenager. Kel's dialogue even before opening the door already clues you in that the bond of friendship showcased in the dream world isn't here anymore. Your mother's message pushing this further along as well. Faced with the reality of the boy in front of you, the player has no choice but to accept this new development. In fact, reading a bit more of his dialogue shows we haven't seen Kel in quite a long time. So long that he had to ask if we even remember him. For the player, this scene is shocking. The entire game so far has been us wandering around without a care in the world with our best friends. Everything isn't always perfect, especially in regards to Aubrey and Kel, but what this group of friends has is special. These relationships are something to be cherished. Most people aren't lucky enough to even experience something so beautiful in their lifetimes. If you ask me, one of the greatest joys of life is knowing you have a strong circle of support that you can rely on and in turn have them rely on you. To see that deteriorate to the point that it's difficult to even call them friends anymore is a true tragedy. We've spent time with this group, laughed at their antics, worried about their missing friends, got excited when they overcame an obstacle. You care about these kids. And now, all that's gone. Even Kel, the goofball lacking emotional maturity, understands that there's a rift between them. Something has been lost, and no matter how friendly he may come off, time has formed a chasm between these two that won't be easy to cross. True to this, as you make your way to hobbies, not a single word is uttered, and there's a noticeable lack of music. There's tension in the air, neither person knowing what to say to the other. At one point, Kel would say anything that came to mind, and now he struggles to say anything at all. You're used to tagging the party, knowing they've got your back as you traverse the dangers of the dream world, and now the person in front of you is practically a stranger. Of course the two of them know this, and that only makes things even more awkward. What adds an extra layer to all this is how most people can relate to how Sunny and Kel are feeling. I think the majority of people have had a friend they grew distant from while growing up. They came to your birthday parties, you hung out with them on the weekend, maybe even played on the same sports team. You laughed, cried, got angry with each other, but at the end of the day, your bond proved far stronger than some minor disagreement. Now, for reasons you may not even fully understand, all that ended. You see them while walking to class, and instead of casually greeting them, you're stuck with this unpleasant nostalgia, thinking of what used to be. Whenever you do interact, there's this strange atmosphere. You used to be good friends, and now you can hardly carry on a conversation. Every sentence weighed down by the past. Although this somber nostalgia isn't only demonstrated through their deteriorated friendship. As you wander around the town, you can see fragments of the past. Sunny and Aubrey swinging together, Hiro and Kel chasing each other on the basketball court, each one fading away like a distant memory that doesn't belong. On a slightly higher note, the player can also see the inspiration behind some of the things you can see in the dream world. The yellow cat in neighbor's room, the playground, even the not quite human children are inspired by real people. It adds a little more depth to the world and makes you appreciate these seamlessly minute details just a little bit more. Once you reach hobbies, the mood takes a shift. Music is finally introduced, and it's fairly upbeat and jovial. Despite how gloomy I've been, going on and on about how the friendship is gone and that it's tragic, Kel tries his absolute best to cover this distance. Of course, he can't do it all at once, but if anyone has a chance in the group, it's him. His lack of tact actually playing to his advantage. All the deep emotional doubts that would plague a normal person pass right over his head, making him the best choice to be Sunny's guide back to reality. Someone who doesn't dwell too much on the past and mostly lives in the present. Sunny was a friend he used used to be close with, and he still values that, so forget about whatever drove them apart. They're together now, and that's what matters. His dialogue is warm and inviting, showing that Kel wasn't knocking on your door every day for nothing. He couldn't just let things end without at least saying goodbye to Sunny, and now that he's got him, he's going to squeeze as much value as he can out of the time that remains. I think most people would have felt defeated. They couldn't possibly make up for all the lost time in just 3 days, and they might as well not bother. If there's anything you can learn from Kel, is that this attitude only guarantees that outcome. Moving past hobbies, the pair make their way to the park where another shocking scene unfolds. Basil is being bullied by a group of kids, and their leader is none other than Aubrey. The twist that the dream world is just that hurts. But this revelation is like a punch to the gut. The Aubrey we've known so far is the exact opposite of the foreign stranger before us. When Omori leaves white space, she's always the one to come barreling towards us, eyes filled with excitement. When the party needs Omori to face his fear of heights, Aubrey is filled with worry, not wanting him to do anything he isn't comfortable with. The whole reason the group even helps Captain Spaceboy is because she wants to help him get over his heartbreak. Kel wanted nothing to do with it. Her flower, the gladiolus, represents someone with strong moral character. The little girl the player is used to is sweet and helpful, staying true to her values and unwilling to turn a blind eye to others. In contrast, the current Aubrey is cold, distant, and violent. She mocks her old friends, taunting Sunny, asking how long it's even been since he left his house. When Basil tries to ask Aubrey for his photo album back, one of her friends smacks him away. Aubrey stands idly by, encouraging the behavior. Instead of helping others, she's now causing suffering, made all the more worse by the target of her abuse being Basil, one of her old friends. To add insult to injury, the first combat encounter you have in the real world is against Aubrey. The interactions with Kel build up this front that perhaps this situation is salvageable, only for Aubrey to smash it with her baseball bat and stomp it into pieces. I talked a lot about emotion in the beginning of this video, about how Omori is an emotional roller coaster that will take you for a ride. It was depressing seeing how much time had passed when first seeing Kel, but this is on a whole other level. Oftentimes the most negative emotion I experience when playing a game is the frustration at not being able to overcome a boss. In this moment, I felt a range of emotions: anger at Aubrey's actions, sadness at realizing that chasm was much wider than I initially thought, but most of all confusion. What happened that could have caused this falling out? What was Hiro's role in all this, and where was Sunny's older sister? I wanted nothing more but to see everyone happily walking beside each other as they chatted the day away. Instead, I was forced to watch former friends attack one another. This is where Omori begins its transition from a good game to something special. The time spent in Headspace is well done, but I wouldn't call it exceptional. If Omori was just a fun adventure between kids with some vague horror elements that weren't explained until the end, I don't think I would have even made this video. It's how the game makes you feel in this moment that makes the title truly exceptional. Most games are written in a way that when something tragic happens, it's regrettable, but you don't have any personal stakes in it. Here you not only understand the character's pain, but experience it for yourself. This scene isn't enough on its own, but it manages to create emotional turmoil within the player and sets the stage for future moments like it. After the brawl, the hooligans retreat, and the two boys learn that Aubrey has Basil's photo album. Kel immediately agrees to get it back for him and drags Sunny along. The remainder of the day focuses on this task as Aubrey can't be found anywhere. Omori has gotten a little real since the player has entered reality, so the game takes the time to add in that lighthearted spice it mixes in so well. Since Kel and Sunny have no idea where Aubrey is, they start asking her new group of friends one by one. The moments you spend with them are brief, but they bring that dream absurdity into the real world. This little punk called Angel views some guy called the Maverick as his master and demands a fight for Aubrey's coordinates. He even has a tall enforcer backing him up. Once you put the kid in his place, he comically reveals he has no idea where Aubrey is. While this was entertaining, the best encounter was with the Maverick himself. Everything about this guy is just comedy gold. He calls himself the Maverick because he hates his actual name and wears a blonde wig in order to look cool, although he's anything but that, literally paying women to fawn over him just to stroke his ego. God, this guy was hilarious. Eventually, Kim, Aubrey's closest friend, informs the party she can be found at the church, and the two of you head off. Once there, all the humorous antics come to a halt as it's time for things to get serious once more. Kel confronts Aubrey about the photo album, and we finally get some answers to enlighten this wave of confusion. Mari is dead, and apparently that was the catalyst for why everything fell apart. Everyone struggled to deal with the loss in their own way, and Aubrey, feeling abandoned by the people who were supposed to be her friends, grew to resent them. From her perspective, they were Aubrey's support network, and the group wasn't there for her when she needed them. Clearly their bond wasn't as strong as she initially thought. Kel takes this blame in stride, even apologizing for not being there for her. But Aubrey is angry. She still comes to church 4 years later because she hasn't gotten over Mari's passing. In fact, the two of them haven't spoken since then. These old wounds haven't healed properly, and now they're being cut open once again. If you look at things from someone who has Aubrey's mentality, that her friends abandoned her, her reaction to Kel's apology isn't too surprising. He doesn't just get to come in 4 years later, apologize, and act like everything's hunky-dory. Everything comes to a boiling point when the rebel begins to leave, only to be stopped by Kel, who despite everything still wants the album back. This leads to a brawl right in the middle of the sermon where all of the blame is put on Aubrey due to her punk-like attire and reputation of bullying kids around the neighborhood. Completely humiliated, the girl makes a run for it. This entire chain of events is rough for everyone involved. Aubrey may be leading some strange scooter gang that antagonizes the neighborhood for entertainment, but I still felt bad for her here. She may not be who she once was, but that doesn't mean the memories are gone. Mari passed away when they were 12. No one at that age has the mental fortitude to handle the death of a close friend. I don't blame anyone from the group for not being there for each other. It's expecting too much. However, I can still understand why Aubrey might feel betrayed. Take a look at her house. The game never goes out of its way to point it out, but it's extremely run down. One of the churchgoers mentions that her father left them. Most people at least have a family they can go to when things get rough. It's clear to me that the pink-haired troublemaker didn't have that. Not only did she have to deal with the loss of Mari, but all of her friends as well. Unsure of what to do with all these emotions swirling inside of her, she channeled them into anger towards the ones she felt abandoned by. I don't think it's fair to call Aubrey a bully when she's just as much of a victim of the harshness of reality. The player also finally gets some answers. The noose and why Mari wasn't crossed out of the photo is because she's the one who died. Throughout the entirety of our time in Headspace, Mari hasn't done anything suspicious at all. True to her word, she's been nothing but helpful. Perhaps the reason we see a ghostly version of her and why we haven't left our house in 4 years is because of her passing. Given the circumstances, I think that's quite a strong reaction. It's a good thing the game raises even more questions not too long after, communicating to the player that Mari's death isn't the end to the mystery. Having achieved the task of obtaining the photo album from Aubrey, the boys make their way back to Basil. His caretaker invites you guys over for dinner, and the three friends take some time to admire the newly obtained photo album. You'll notice there are a few differences between the one we saw in the dream world versus the album in reality. First, there's a lot more pictures, with some of them even being missing. I think most people will notice that there aren't any photos featuring Mari, which is rather suspicious. One photo has the kids hugging Sunny's stuffed animals, which if you look closely, are actually some of the characters you meet in Headspace, further connecting the two realities. The purpose of showing the player the album here is to pull at the heartstrings even further, to show you even more of the happy memories they all used to have as kids, and juxtapose them with the events that just happened. Great, I was already sad, and now the game is really bringing on the depression. The final thing worth discussing is the quality time we spent with Basil in the bathroom. Sunny walks in alone and finds the guy muttering to himself that everything is going to be okay. Judging by his expression, that's anything but the truth for the flower boy. Although he seems relieved when he notices Sunny entering the room. I haven't been mentioning it, but throughout the entire day, Basil has been a bit off. He always speaks in very short sentences, and the way his dialogue is written makes him come across as constantly anxious, bordering on mentally unstable at a few points. Even when you go to return his photos, he peeks out of the doorway, scared of who might be there. I think it's clear by this exchange that my mental instability comment wasn't too far off the mark. What's most noteworthy, though, is his comment about there being something behind Sunny. Initially, there appears to be nothing, but if you look into the mirror, you'll notice the creature chasing you around the dream world. This is the first time you ever get a good look at this thing. It doesn't appear to look like anything most people have seen before, giving no hint as to its origin or what it represents. The entire scene itself is incredibly uncomfortable. The room has similar shading to the darkness of your home, and Basil's eyes glow an unnatural blue, giving him a supernatural vibe. He also has this odd black web flashing underneath him. Every interaction with the flower boy has been a bit off, like he's frightened or perhaps hiding something. Much like with Aubrey, the timid yet caring boy who always wants to face the sun is nowhere to be found. Mari's sudden death is a good explanation for everything so far, but it can't explain away this. What does this strange eye creature represent, and why is Basil so mentally damaged? As soon as the game throws you a few bones, it immediately puts a wrench into everything, raising even more questions and bringing the eye demon lurking in the background to the forefront. Before I transition to the final section of the day, I want to take a moment to cover all the side content in Faraway Town. Don't worry, when I say all, I don't mean going over every single task in detail. Instead, I want to talk about what all of them do for the experience. Most of these little side quests aren't particularly worth mentioning. Finding TV remotes and getting medicine for old ladies isn't particularly interesting. Most chores are very basic fetch quests that don't require much thought from the player, although I wouldn't say they're boring. I think they accomplish the task of adding some more personality to the town and the people who inhabit it. Once again, it's the writing that brings these moments to life. The dialogue the characters have gives each of them some charm. Everyone feels a bit distinct. All-American Dad feels like a guy who you could spend all day talking to about sports. You can even find him and his family having an outing at the park. These Bread twins are worked to the bone by their parents and sound like hypnotized zombies, but when they get some time off, they're incredibly playful, wanting to make the most of their precious time. Yet again, it's not each individual quest that makes these tasks so entertaining and endearing, it's the consistent level of quality found throughout many of them. The town even comes to life when you see people you spoke to on the first day interacting with each other somewhere else on another day. They aren't just static NPCs placed in a room. They live in this town, and the game communicates that effectively. Alright, with that quaint little side tangent out of the way, Sunny returns home and the player is bombarded with this horrific imagery, employing horror strategy number 1 yet again. The initial stairwell scene is just the confrontation with the fear itself, but here we get a lot more detail. So much so that I think it's safe to say this is one of the most frightening moments of the game. I still wouldn't say I was truly scared, but I definitely felt anxious while walking around the spider-infested house. These things are all over the floor and even parts of the ceiling. When you step on them, they make a squishing noise, but there's so many that Sunny never seems to make a dent. There's some important symbolism here that also makes sense once you finish the game, so I won't go into detail, but I'd like to point out the mysterious black door, the bloodied back screen, and the tangled black creature at the bottom of the stairwell. We'll return here when I talk about how the game uses symbolism so effectively. Everything else is mostly a repeat of last time, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. One thing I believe this section does well is surprise you. The first adventure with the endless stairwell comes out of nowhere. The shock factor combined with not knowing what's happening really helps create a sense of tension and fear. The spider nightmare doesn't have that unknown. It plays out exactly the same as the initial scene, so the player can take some solace in at least having some context behind what's happening. In order to make up for this, the game pulls out all the stops to make you as uncomfortable as possible and make the tonal shift come out of nowhere. One thing I want to point out is how the something waiting at the top of the stairs morphs into the ghost of Mari, feeding even more fuel to the mystery. Honestly, at this point I had no idea what was going on and was just along for the ride. Hopefully it all makes sense at the end. Anyway, Sunny heads back to sleep and we yet again find ourselves controlling Omori in white space. Initially when I was walking around Faraway Town with Kel, I thought to myself, I want to return to the dream world. I didn't think the section was bad by any means, I was just having a blast experiencing all the craziness the dream world had to offer. I loved all the wacky adventures and just wanted more of it. However, by the end of the first day, I couldn't wait to return to the town. The events that just transpired were infinitely more interesting than anything that happened in Headspace. I like absurdist humor as much as the next guy, but nothing beats a dramatic, well-written story. The twist that the group you've grown attached to was torn apart 4 years ago, the shocking reveal of who Aubrey has become, and Basil's mental instability was all that filled my mind. I wanted to see what the future held for all these characters. Oddly enough, being sent back to Sunny's imagination made me feel the same as when I first left it, only now backwards. My mind was engrossed in the events of Faraway Town. It's here that I get to my second major criticism of Omori, that being the dream world's lack of connection with the events going on in reality. Headspace was wacky, but it didn't feel like there was any cohesion to what I was doing. The friends are supposed to be looking for Basil, and instead they end up forgetting about him, being too distracted chasing after sprout moles and helping Pluto escape getting stuck in a trophy room. This applies directly to Firefly Forest and Sweetheart's Castle. The group takes a detour to watch Sweetheart's show, and then gets wrapped up in a slew of problems with finding Basil being the last thing on their minds. Now people who have played the game may be thinking, Angle, the whole point of the dream world is to be Sunny's escape from reality, to surround himself with the familiar warmth of his childhood and not face the truth. Believe me, I understand that. I'm not trying to argue that it doesn't make sense in terms of the narrative. My point is that most of the events of the dream world have no bearing on the plot at all. So when you return, many of your actions feel kind of pointless. I don't think it's accurate to call these events filler, but that's the best word that comes to mind in order to communicate what I'm trying to say. The outside sections are where the plot pushes itself along, and when you go back to the dream world, everything else gets put on pause. You don't really feel like you're accomplishing something, especially because the actual goal of finding Basil gets thrown out the window after a good good 20 minutes of the sequence. Yet again, I know that's done on purpose, but just because something makes sense, it doesn't mean it's great writing. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm not saying Sweetheart's Castle or the other nearby locations are a bad portion of the game. In fact, I can't remember the last time a game made me outright laugh so hard. Ruining Christmas, having a moment of silence for the Sprout Mole the party murdered, Sweetheart being offended by this poor guy's very existence. I would be here forever just listing off everything. Despite how much I really enjoyed playing through the castle, I couldn't shake the feeling that once this was over, I would finally be allowed to see what would befall the cast. Hiro is supposed to be returning tomorrow. What kind of developments will his return create? Has he changed in any way? Will I get to see everyone make up, or will everything crash and burn? The Prologue and Otherworld don't have this problem because without them, Faraway Town falls flat. The player needs to get invested in this friendship, and these sections do an amazing job accomplishing that goal. The castle is extremely entertaining and a massive comedic success, but it feels like a lengthy in-between section of the real meat of the title. I know I said the title needed whimsical sections to break up the drama and horror, but the lightheartedness isn't the issue. These portions of the game need to have some plot significance to keep you out of limbo, and that just isn't the case. With that point out of the way, I'm not going to cover the majority of Sweetheart simply because I don't have anything to say that I haven't already. The enemy encounters all play exactly the same from before. I still use the happy strategy for every boss fight, and while I think the third visit to the dream world is the most entertaining, there isn't anything fundamentally different from it in Otherworld, with the only notable exception being an improvement in the level design through the dungeon and courtyard mazes. Yet again, the antics are really fun and the soundtrack is amazing, but like my previous tangent points out, there's not much substance here. The spiders and general presentation in Firefly Forest help reinforce the balance between lighthearted and frightening. The Sprout Mall village is mostly a small area with a few entertaining side quests, and the ugly plant creatures featured inside the castle are hysterical. Yeah, after this trip, I highly doubt anyone would think of them as highly intelligent. These things are complete fools. With that being said, there are two moments of the third trip that are worth discussing. The first being the chat with Daddy Longlegs, and the other being the Lost Library. Longlegs is unlike any other NPC we've seen in the dream world. He's hidden behind this maze filled with Miwo spider abominations, and in general is far creepier looking than anyone else. Being pitch black, holding a lantern, those things are always reassuring, and coming in at a whopping "how's the weather up there" feet tall. Although it's not his appearance that makes him noteworthy, but his dialogue. Most of it is nonsensical gibberish at this point in the game. He talks quite a bit about getting lost, and even insinuating you're doing it on purpose and hiding away from some truth. I don't think most people will really understand anything the guy is saying, except for a few details at the end. Longlegs tells us a story of this world's creation, explaining that at first there were merely two entities, the Dreamer and his room. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? With time, the Dreamer created more and more worlds for him to explore, eventually stumbling upon a darkness. Fearful of this, he created guardians to protect him and sealed the darkness away to the bottom of the dream world. Although no matter how far the Dreamer distanced himself from the darkness, it always found an entrance through the cracks. In order to combat this, the Dreamer chose to forgo his own existence and live among the inhabitants of the dream. It seems even this wasn't enough, as one may forget a peril, but a peril never forgets to be. The darkness may have been contained, but it still lurks, its presence still plaguing the Dreamer. Hoo boy, now that's a lot of mumbo-jumbo now, isn't it? The Dreamer is clearly Sunny, and his room is white space. The darkness breaking through are these moments we keep having at the end of each trip through the dream world. Basil, the barn, and soon the Lost Library. Clearly Sunny is choosing to forget something, most likely because it's too traumatic for him to face. Although just what that is unknown. The chat with Daddy Longlegs may not push the outside narrative along, but it gives us some insights into what the purpose of the dream world and white space is. While I wouldn't say this one little moment is enough to counteract my previous point about the dream world lacking overall plot significance, this was still a welcome addition and provides something interesting to mull over. The Lost Library is the final section of the Sweetheart Castle portion of Headspace. Not a whole lot is actually learned here. You mostly read some entries detailing some moments between the cast, all of them from a specific point of view. The actual names of the characters are hidden, but it's easy to tell which character is supposed to be who by the context of the situation and the length of the name itself, with the single space representing Sunny himself. Actually, each scenario is from his point of view, giving us an insight into who Sunny is as a character and how he views his friends. For example, one story has the kid resting his head on Aubrey's shoulder, and he vows to never forget this moment. Suddenly, I think I know why Aubrey is so flirty with Omori in the dream world. Sunny, you sly dog, you. You also find out why he's afraid of spiders fighters and that the group planned to build a treehouse together. It all ends with you gazing into a hole and seeing Basil go all demon eyes on us again. While this information is interesting, most of it isn't that significant. However, not every piece of information has to be imperative to the story. Supporting details that add more character to a member of the cast can be equally as interesting. Learning about Sunny's crush and why he developed some of his fears adds some valuable context to past scenes in the game, helping us obtain a stronger understanding of who the silent protagonist is as a person and what events made him who he is. The atmosphere created through the library's presentation helps as well. It feels like an ancient ruin, something long abandoned, and you're pillaging its secrets. Who wouldn't get a kick out of that? I would have preferred at least some kind of bone to be thrown in regards to what's plaguing Sunny, especially because the Basil scene feels completely pointless, and we've received practically nothing over the course of the game. But that doesn't mean what we did get wasn't meaningful. After seeing the Basil image, Omori is yet again teleported back to white space where the player is given no other choice but to stab themselves and begin day 2. This may be a little controversial, but Day 2 is easily the worst part of the entire game. It certainly isn't bad, but in comparison to the first day, it's underwhelming. Mainly because not much actually happens. I mean, besides Hiro making his grand debut and Aubrey pushing Basil into the lake, I struggle to find anything that's all that noteworthy. A sizable portion of the day is spent meeting Kel's family and performing errands for the mother. I wasn't upset by this, but I wasn't too enthusiastic either. I can see that you're not convinced. It's actually accurate to say more happens during the second day than the first, although the argument here is quality over quantity. Day 1 has some truly fantastic moments. The reveals of Kel and Aubrey, the church scene, and Basil's special bathroom time are all incredibly interesting and well written. Looking at the confrontation scene, there's nothing here that pushes the narrative along, at least not in a substantial way. The hooligans beat up Kel and Sunny, and despite their loss, Aubrey is still hanging out at their old spot. No matter how much she denies it, the girl still cares about her old friends. The former brunette then accidentally pushes Basil into the lake, and Hiro saves the day. We don't learn anything from this scene, and we're certainly not anywhere closer to reuniting the friend group. While the moment is dramatic, it feels like drama just for the sake of it, rather than anything meaningful. It doesn't help that the group just leaves Aubrey behind and doesn't confront her about her actions. I get Basil's condition comes first, but the fact that Hiro didn't even recognize her just seems absurd to me. Her hair and eyes are a different color, but he's known this girl for a significant portion of his life. There's no way he wouldn't recognize her. And then instead of trying to talk to Aubrey after bringing Basil home, the cast dicks around with the brother's family. Let me tell you what I didn't care for. Then Hiro gets the bright idea to visit their old treehouse, which sounds really interesting, only for it to be too late in the day. Instead, it's put off until tomorrow. A lot of what happens during Day 2 feels insignificant when considering the overall plot. The only impact Basil falling into the lake has is making Sunny face his fear of water, and having Aubrey blame herself even more for something that happens during one of the non-canon endings, which adds up to a whole lot of nothing. I wasn't exactly wondering what Hiro and Kel's home life was like. It ends up being as generic as you can get, adding nothing to their characters, making this substantial portion of the day feel like pointless filler. Despite my complaints, there is one thing I really like about Day 2. If we go back a little bit before Hiro makes his entrance, you can go and visit Mari's grave with Kel. Hiro isn't mentally prepared, so it's impossible to do this after he joins the party. Kel will tell Sunny how his brother reacted to Mari's death, that he locked himself in his room for a full year and stopped caring for himself. One day, Kel extends an olive branch to his brother, explaining how worried he is, and Hiro freaks out, verbally assaulting him until their parents come to calm things down. Hiro gets control of himself again soon after, and furiously apologizes to Kel for his behavior. I haven't spent too much time talking about Hiro's character, but I think now is a good time. In Headspace, Hiro is treated like he's perfect. His skill is getting unique dialogue with NPCs where they thank him for helping them out and essentially call the guy a god. Sweetheart falls in love with him on sight, and no matter how many times he rejects her, she's always willing to take him back. It's kind of the meme of the game that Hiro can do no wrong. Usually I find these kinds of characters insufferably unrealistic. No one is naturally good at everything, and we all have our faults. However, I never once felt this way about Kel's older brother, and the scene I just explained is a good representation as to why. It's because despite the meme, the aptly named Hiro is no god, he certainly isn't perfect, and he's no hero. Everyone in the friend group loved Mari, but for Hiro, it went beyond that. The guy didn't just see her as a friend, but the love of his life. He had spent years growing up with Mari, and besides her little brother, no one was closer to her. I can't imagine what it must feel like for the person you love, someone you think you know so well, to suddenly kill themselves. People always end up blaming themselves when someone close to them does this. Hiro probably knew Mari better than anyone in the friend group, so I'm not surprised the poor guy took it so hard. You see, the problem with White Knight Knight characters is that they're unrelatable to the point of insufferable. No one actually acts this way. Everyone feels the pull to do something selfish or hurtful to others for their own self-gain. Hiro screaming at his brother who only wanted to help him is a perfect example of that behavior. You're such an emotional mess, and this little punk who just casually moved on from Mari's death thinks he can tell you of all people to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This worthless, ignorant little brat doesn't understand. He doesn't understand a goddamn thing! It's irrational, and it certainly isn't justified, but one can imagine someone in Hiro's position having those exact thoughts. The thoughts of a human, someone who's real, and not some imaginary character. The scene itself is strong, especially told from Kel's perspective, but its biggest strength is what it does for Hiro's character. Although it isn't just this scene, I would argue the entire day is meant to be about conveying to the player who Hiro really is. To show that he's vulnerable, and by no means invincible. Just look at what happens once the group agrees to sleep over at Sunny's house for the final time. Most of the scenes focus on Hiro. He plays Mari's piano, and once Kel falls asleep, has a heart-to-heart with the protagonist, regretting that he wasn't there to support Sunny and probably the group in general. If he hadn't broken down like he did, maybe things wouldn't have ended up this way. I'm not trying to blame the guy here. I think his reaction was perfectly reasonable, but whenever waking up from a period of self-deprecation, you eventually feel as if so much time was wasted doing nothing. If I skip a bit ahead, the two have another moving scene in the piano room where the brother reveals he still thinks about Mari every day, and the player can even find him quietly sobbing to himself on her old piano. The comically perfect version of the 19-year-old is a fabrication. While the game can be a little over the top with all the awards in Hiro's room and what happens in the next section of Headspace, at his core, he's just like you and me. Just far more handsome, likable, charismatic, beautiful, special, wonderful, spectacular, all-knowing, godlike. The peak of overall, I stand by Day 2 being lackluster. It pales in comparison to the gut-punch reveal of what's become of the main cast on Day 1, and is nothing compared to the events of Day 3. The dream world already puts the player in plot limbo for a significant period of time. No new developments occur during the second day, and while I enjoyed seeing Hiro's more vulnerable side, he isn't all that different from Headspace. If you add on that now we have to go through an entire new section of the dream world before we can return to reality, and things look even more bleak. Okay, I think I've belabored this point enough. Let's move on to the final Headspace portion of the game. Yet again, I'm not going to cover the majority of what happens in the last resort and inside Humphrey because I don't have anything new to say. The dialogue is stunningly good, with some personal favorites being Mr. Jossam respecting the promise the group made to find Basil, him breaking up the fight between the children and Pluto, which is also fantastic by the way, and the Humphreys were just ludicrous in all the right ways. Despite that, there's the same dream world pacing problem, only this time it's even worse. This is the longest section featuring Last Resort, Endless Highway, and the inside of Humphrey. The only sections out of all of this that feels like they matter, instead of being mindless childish fun, are the deeper well portions and the initial water escapade with Mari. So with that point made, how about I actually cover those two events? The time spent with Mari is the first and only time the girl will follow Omori around. All of the children, including her party, are gone. Sunny's sister knows he hates to be alone, so she takes it upon herself to finally step up and join him. This is the only time in the entire game that anything like this occurs. Mari is married to her picnic blanket, only leaving its perimeter to briefly talk to the party, but yet impressively, she still feels like she's along for the journey. It's not a coincidence that Sunny's sister serves as the checkpoint system for the game. Her entire character fits the mechanic like a glove. She's so sweet, kind, comforting, and accepting. As long as she's around, everything really will be okay. Whenever the group is tired or in the need of a pick-me-up, here comes Mari and her picnic blanket to the rescue, always preparing a safe space for you amidst the chaos of the dream. She'll comment on where she's currently plopped herself down, and you even get more insights into her playful nature when the party has a picnic with her. She's such a warm and inviting force for the group, always ready to support them. It's truly impressive how these little interactions add so much depth to a normally benign mechanic, and make a character synonymous with the word dependable. Despite all this, Mari is also depicted in quite a negative light. She appears in most of the nightmare sequences, and it's clear at this point that her death is the source of Sunny's trauma. Even in the beginning of the video, I speculated whether or not Mari was going to be a villain or not. Well, this brief moment is where all of those doubts about her can be laid to rest. You might notice when Sunny faces his final fear of water, Mari repeats the exact same lines the unknown voice states, all but confirming that the one who was helping Sunny the whole time was his sister. Even in death, Mari is still supporting the little brother that she loves so much. Her impact on him so strong that years later, buried underneath a mountain of suppression, these words of encouragement still reach him. It really speaks to how close these siblings were. Though eventually, your time together comes to an end. Mari almost ethereally hovers above the water. For the first time outside of Daddy Longlegs, a character breaks free from the puppet strings of the dream. None of your party members ever reference the darker moments at the end of each section, at best only vaguely recalling what happened. Mari directly references that her little brother is choosing to forget something, and even calls him Sunny instead of Omori. It's clear that she's keyed into exactly what's going on, although the girl isn't willing to tell us, saying it's not her place. The scene concludes with her transforming into her true ghost form and disappearing through a large window. The swim with Mari is similar to the Lost Library. There isn't a eureka moment where some detail is given that helps solve the mystery. If anything, it only caused me to ask even more questions. Was this dream Mari reaching the natural end of her life cycle, or was the literal ghost of Mari coming to speak with her little brother? There's no point in speculating, so I won't harp on this. What this encounter does do is give Mari some much needed development. I spoke about how we know the girl based on all the picnic interactions, and I stand by that, but you can't forget that this character is dead. The faraway town sections do an excellent job expanding upon the other main characters, but it can't do that for Mari. Well, that's not actually true, but she still can't hold a conversation with us. It's here she joins the front lines and shows a little bit more of herself. Even though Mari's dead, she wants Sunny to live a happy life, to overcome what is plaguing him and find some peace in reality. He can't do that by choosing to live as Omori. He needs to be himself, to be Sunny. That's why she drops the act and directly references her little brother. She's trying to give him a little push towards living an actual life again. Although the sister doesn't want to overstep, he has to do this himself. We may not be any closer to knowing what exactly is plaguing Sunny, but that doesn't matter. This moment is a beautiful scene between two siblings and gives the dead girl a much-deserved moment in the spotlight. Transitioning to Deeper Well, the area is in sharp contrast to the normal lighthearted nature of the dream. Typically the player would see something like this at the end, but now it's slowly leaking in. Deeper Well and the Humphrey boss fight embody this tonal shift. When walking around this new location, there will be plenty of NPCs referencing some rather taboo subjects. They speak about the dreamer, what will befall the world, and Sunny's suppression. If you advance even further, you can see little somethings growing out of the ground. This is the farthest down we've ever gone, and you can tell the darkness is only growing stronger. Oddly enough, the game then decides to completely shift gears back to the happy-go-lucky adventure. Humphrey does have the Chimera chase sequence, which will leave the player on edge as it slowly stalks towards you, but even the way this foe is defeated isn't taken seriously. It's not until the very end when these sea witches decide to sell off Kel to recoup some of their losses, and the whale you've been exploring gets so hungry you begin to look like a tasty snack that the darkness resurfaces. Now I'm gonna make like the Chinese mob and give the game some credit. Humphrey losing complete control of himself is truly terrifying. The line time to feast, time for you to be deceased is the most disturbing rhyme I've ever heard. It really pushed the anxiety levels up to their breaking point. While the battle itself isn't anything special mechanically, the imagery, music, lines of dialogue, and overall feeling the sequence provokes in the player is phenomenal. I said the spider boss was nightmare fuel, but perhaps this encounter better embodies the phrase, proving that the gameplay aspects of a fight aren't the only thing to consider when rating the quality of a fight. However, as I was alluding to a few seconds earlier, the dungeon itself feels entirely unnecessary. We already had Last Resort to serve as the happy adventure portion. Why did we need an entire other area dedicated to this? The transition to Deeper Well was thought-provoking and gives the player a slice of some of that plot they've been craving, only to then immediately have all that pushed aside, only resurfacing at the very end. I think maintaining a consistent level of horror inside of Humphrey would have been much stronger, with a few Dreamworld lore drops added in to keep the player's interest. The reason why I like adding even more horror elements is because it feels like we're revving up to something. The darkness that keeps being mentioned is growing too powerful for Sunny to suppress, and is now actively invading his adventure with his friends. It all culminates with Humphrey turning on you and trying to devour the party. So now you can have the Last Resort serve the normal function and begin building up to the game's big final act, finally giving some purpose to the Dreamworld events. Instead, we get a very brief interlude, only to then immediately be thrust back into the title's normal antics. Like I've said multiple times, I don't think the Humphrey section we did get was bad. I did enjoy going through it, but this is where the absurdism overstays its welcome. Escaping Humphrey also gives the player the final key necessary to complete the Hangman game message. Once you collect that W, it reads, "Welcome to Black Space." There are two games that come to mind when I think of Omori. I've already mentioned Earthbound, and the other is Yume Nikki. In comparison to most games, it's difficult to describe what the purpose of this game even is. What you do is travel through various doors leading to zones to explore. There aren't any enemies, it's just you and the scenery. Those who play it typically derive joy from wondering what on earth is going on in this girl's dreams. Clearly she's seen some things. So how does Omori relate to Yume Nikki? Well, I could point out Sunny's head shake is the same as the one used in the title, but that's more of a small reference. The part of the game that embodies Yume Nikki is, well, you guessed it, black space. An endless chasm of doors, all leading to new rooms with each making less sense than the next. Disturbing doesn't even begin to describe what is buried inside the darkest depths of Sunny's mind. This is what a tortured soul looks like. We don't know what this truth is, but it's clear what kind of impact suppressing it for 4 years has had. Instead of confronting his demons, they've been allowed to fester, growing even stronger and more twisted with each passing day. Just take a look at a fraction of the imagery depicted. Some rooms focus on your party. There are faceless versions of them endlessly walking around, with some even falling over like a malfunctioning machine left to rot. Others have you finding Basil only for him to reach a gruesome fate each time. One has him popping like a watermelon, another has him getting decapitated when his head gets stuck between an elevator. Although the most off-putting is when a nightmare version of your friends murder him right in front of you. One room really traumatizes the player by making it seem like the only way to escape is to kill Miwo, giving you numerous warnings before you finally commit the act, only for you to still be trapped with the real exit being stabbing yourself. The most haunting room for me was this mirror area where Sunny's reflection gets more and more distorted, eventually leading to this horrifying version of Mari appearing. Black space is a haunting conglomeration of Sunny's darkest thoughts. While going through it, the player will probably have no idea what's going on or what any of this means. Some rooms really are just vague nonsense that don't seem to have any symbolism at all. For example, even after playing the game 3 times, I have no idea what this stick figure area is supposed to represent. What you can get out of these rooms is that Sunny seems to have some negative feelings for Basil, to put it lightly, with the protagonist often standing idly by as the flower boy begs for him to save him, even implying that we may have killed him inside this tunnel on the raft. I've complained quite a bit how Headspace doesn't connect back to the plot or create any interesting developments. I believe those criticisms are fair, and Black Space doesn't provide any answers, but this segment doesn't need to. I was in awe of how the devs created such disturbing scenery. It makes me wonder just what dark depths of their own minds they had to visit in order to come up with some of the things envisioned in this tormented ruin. We knew Sunny was damaged, but seeing the visual embodiment of what all that pain and suffering looks like is equally traumatizing and intriguing. You feel like your eyes are beholding something forbidden, like an alien text that just reading will overload your mind into oblivion, but your morbid curiosity pushes you onward. You may be disgusted and perturbed, but you just can't seem to get enough. Suffice to say, I thought Black Space was mesmerizing. I didn't like what I was seeing, but I couldn't look away either. The dark amalgamation reaches its climax when Omori finally locates the real Basil who was banished to this maze. For some reason, the flower boy is apologizing profusely, begging for his best friend to save him from the black mass binding him. Shadow Basil also makes an appearance, telling Sunny that the truth is here and that it's finally time to face the music. Although when we do go inside, answers aren't what we find. Instead, Basil is mercilessly dragged away by some unknown force. Omori slowly stalks toward him, with still bloody fingers being revealed one by one. Confronting the flower boy, Sunny loses all control of the shell, seemingly growing a will of its own. With your best friend forcibly held in place by the guiding red hands, all the cries of pain, the pleading for help, fall on deaf ears as the puppet gazes into Basil's eyes, and then, without a shred of mercy, murders the boy. With the deed done, Omori casts his so-called best friend's corpse aside, not giving it a second glance. With the aid of the red hands, he takes his place on his demonic throne as the true master of this world, revealing that this puppet isn't going to play his role anymore. We've actually been told that Omori, not to be confused with Sunny himself, is evil multiple times. You're warned by the mysterious voice after Humphrey, and the various strangers found in Black Space hint at it as well. The reason Omori takes control here and stabs Basil is he doesn't want Sunny to face the truth. He needs the traumatized teen to rely on him for support. We see this in the game's other route where Sunny doesn't reconnect with his friends. Without the strength given by his old companions in the real world, the teen isn't strong enough to face the truth, instead wanting the endless cycle of the dream to continue. Shadow Basil refuses to let this happen and tries to force Sunny to face what he's been hiding for so long. Except the youth retreats once again and embraces Omori, letting the shell fully encase him in order to fight back the darkness he refuses to face, eradicating Sunny's consciousness forever. If Sunny decides to face his greatest demon, then he doesn't need the dream, white space, or Omori. Although the creation has grown powerful, perhaps too powerful, and forcibly halts any and all progression to ensure his creator never overcomes what's ailing him. If I'm being honest, the Omori evil hand reveal is not actually as concrete as I'm making it out to be. You would be forgiven if you didn't draw these conclusions when watching this scene, as its meaning is slightly vague. However, I do think as the game progresses, an understanding of just what is happening here will be obtained. Speaking on the merits of the moment itself, it's similar to the rest of Black Space. You may not have all the pieces to the puzzle in order to understand what's going on, but the pure spectacle and imagery just grips you. The red foggy background, the bloody trail, and music all combine together to create a gruesome image that you can't help but have your eyes glued to. With this shocking turn of events, Sunny awakens and we move on to the final day of the game. Black Space does an appropriate job providing this sense of escalation, that things are finally progressing and soon enough that plot dam is going to break. Consequently, Day 3 is the culmination of everything Omori has been building towards over its entire runtime, and it certainly doesn't disappoint. Let's begin with confronting Aubrey about what happened during the whole lake fiasco. Every single time we've spoken to the girl, it's always been the worst man for the job doing most of the talking. If the dream world is any indication, Aubrey and Kel mix together like oil and water, which is why the introduction of Hiro into the equation is what finally gets her to sit down and have a normal conversation. The four are finally reunited, and you can already begin to see the normal group dynamic beginning to manifest. Hiro plays the mediator between the two, not rushing to judge Aubrey right away, willing to hear her out, viewing her as a friend, not an enemy. It's been obvious since Day 2 that the hooligan leader still cares about her friends. Why would she bother to keep the photo album if she didn't? With both brothers pulling on these heartstrings, the girl finally relents. It's here that you also find the remainder of Basil's photo album, mainly all the pictures that feature Mari. The player has looked at these photos many times, to the point that it may have begun to feel repetitive. That is not the case here, getting to finally see all the wonderful pictures of Sunny's older sister. You already know who Mari is at this point. The game doesn't just tell you that she's a doting older sister that adds a little bit of light wherever she goes. You directly experience that and come to understand it for yourself. The photos here only confirm what we already know, but they do add something to Mari's character. For the entire game, Mari has kept herself at arm's length. She may radiate a loving, motherly aura, but she always feels like she's at a distance, never getting involved directly. Mari's there if you need her, but she doesn't ever forcefully heal your party or provide any hints unless you ask. It's up to you to rely on her. There's one exception to this, and even then she's overstepping her bounds. There's even multiple times where the game has Sunny chasing after Mari, but always failing to reach her. Despite this though, she's not some ghost or teleporting picnic basket guardian, but a real, living, breathing human being. These photos epitomize this. We're used to seeing Mari as the dependable older sister, but there's so much more. She's an important friend, a flirty troublemaker, a role model, the love of Hiro's life, and a doting older sister. You may notice that Mari is smiling in every single picture she's in. She cherished everyone in this group and the time they spent together. In turn, Mari was a beacon of light for them. The game isn't wrong when it says the sun shone brighter when she was around. These images aren't just mere photos, they're irreplaceable memories, proof of the bond all of them once shared. Faced with this overwhelming sense of nostalgia, of simpler, happier times, the group finally comes together again. When I first ventured outside of Sunny's home and found the party only consisting of two characters, I felt lonely, like something or perhaps someone was missing. It's a simple thing, watching Aubrey take her place behind Kel, but it's packed with so much emotion. In the dream world, the four of you are always together. The three other characters' presence is taken for granted. You've seen what once was and desire to see it return. With the addition of Aubrey, the cast you've been controlling for the entire game finally unites as one cohesive unit. It may not be exactly the same. Mari's passing and the years of inaction have taken their toll, but the group can finally take their first steps towards closing that gap created between them. I was so happy to see everyone walking side by side again, burying the hatchet and acknowledging each other as the friends I knew they were. I was so invested in these children and was elated to simply watch them all walk together again. I mentioned this earlier, but in the dream world, there were plenty of spots where the cast could just hang out and enjoy each other's presence. One of the best touches of the game is having Faraway Town filled with moments like these once everyone gets back together. They can go read comics at Hobbies, play video games in Kel's room, eat pizza together, and that's only a few. All the activities have some personality sprinkled in them. Kel devours the entire pizza, the group cheers Sunny on as he battles the game, and Aubrey will hit Kel for laughing obnoxiously at a joke. The party hasn't had a single moment like this for 4 years, but despite the huge amount of time, they haven't missed a beat. The group dynamic wasn't destroyed, just merely discarded, and now they've picked it up where it fell. These tiny moments aren't much on their own, but watching the group group have fun in each other's presence again just warms the heart. My personal favorite out of all these little interactions is when Aubrey has a heart-to-heart with Sunny. She apologizes for her behavior and in a bit of an awkward manner tells him that she still cares about him. It's a really lovely and touching scene between the two, giving us shades of the sweet little cinnamon roll that was devoured by the cruelty of reality. I loved walking around the town seeking out every single hangout spot I could. It was so heartwarming just to sit back and watch the party perform all the simple mundane tasks of a normal friend group. It's so endearing and just makes you fall in love with them all over again. I think this mundaneness is part of what makes it appealing as well. These hangout spots and even the moments captured in Basil's photo album aren't what we usually associate important moments with. Typically we glorify larger than life encounters as the experiences that define our lives, but I feel this couldn't be farther from the truth. It's the often overlooked in-between moments that provide the real value. There's nothing inherently special about what we see in Basil's photo album. All we see are some kids having a picnic, going to the beach, washing dishes, and celebrating birthday parties. But it's the people you share these moments with, the happiness the group shared, and the love they had for each other that shines the brightest. Something as simple as watching Saturday morning cartoons with his friends is what Sunny looked forward to the most every week. It's the people in your life, the relationships you cultivated, that makes life worth living. One scene that I feel would be a disservice not to talk about is when they all visit Mari's grave. The focus is primarily on Hiro. As I've said before, he's never visited. He's hard on himself and regrets what he perceives as selfishness. But I think we all know Mari would understand. Understand that some things are just too painful. There's a nice little touch where the flowers placed on her grave are lilies of the valley, the same flowers Basil used to represent her in the dream world. However, the scene doesn't end there. There's a prompt asking the player if you would like to have one final picnic with Mari. I love how the game specifically asks if you'd like to have a picnic with Mari. I love the detail and the placement of the characters, how they all sit in a similar manner to their Headspace versions. I especially love that Mari's beautiful theme plays over this wonderful moment, the absolutely wonderful, beautiful melody that is her music. Everything I've pointed out is so simple, and yet it's these little details that make moments like these so much more powerful. As the group sits there enjoying their time with Mari, the player is allowed to just take it all in, to feel the emotional depth, the sadness of knowing Mari will never host another picnic. She'll never flirt with Hiro again, mediate between Aubrey and Kel, or shower her favorite little brother with her love. But despite all that, they still choose to face that pain and overcome it because the impact this one girl had on all their lives was just that special. I really could talk endlessly about Day 3, but I need to stop somewhere, so let's move on. Eventually, the friends make good on that promise to visit the treehouse, but before that, they have to face what caused their falling out to begin with. Only this time, they're not all going their separate ways, too overwhelmed by the shock of what occurred to even think about each other. This time, the cast is facing it together, because if the game has demonstrated anything, these four can overcome any obstacle when they work together. A lot of things have remained unsaid between the four of them, so now they take the time to confront Mari's death, sharing in each other's pain and recounting their personal experiences. Visiting the stump Mari hung herself from isn't easy for any of them. At one point, Hiro even starts to tear up, ushering the group ahead before he loses it. This spot has been burned into their minds, the circumstances surrounding it turning this tree into something forbidden. The memory of that day isn't anything any of them will ever forget, even recalling exactly what they were doing, no matter how arbitrary it was. What strikes me about this conversation is just how real it feels. Aubrey was out with her dad, and the brothers were shopping with their mom. The details themselves are so minuscule they hardly matter, but they make this tragedy feel even more real. The grief they all share threatens to overwhelm them, so like I said earlier, Hiro rushes them forward to the treehouse. When you first enter the children's play den, the screen is black, but a familiar tune plays while you're waiting. It's one of the first songs you ever hear, the music of Neighbor's Room. That's because the second room you ever visit, the happy den you always meet your friends in, is actually the group's old treehouse. Everything is just as you remember. There's a familiar TV, toaster, a deck of playing cards in the center. You even find Aubrey's old toy Mr. Plant Egg. This linking of the dream world and actual locations of the game adds so much more emotional depth to this room. The cast feels nostalgic returning to a place they used to play in when they were younger. Kel finds a pair of his shoes, and Hiro's old cookbooks can be found as well. There's history here for everyone involved, including you. You've ran through Neighbor's Room multiple times, and seeing how Sunny's imaginary fabrication relates to the real-world equivalent helps you relate to what the characters are feeling. You feel nostalgic and intrigued as Sunny recounts his memories involved with each item. Something in particular particular stands out though: the final photo of Basil's album. The group adds it to their collection and takes the time to reminisce one last time. It was here I felt enough was enough. I had looked at these images plenty of times, and adding just one picture that wasn't particularly impactful didn't merit this. I say this because looking at the group's memories most of the time feels special and shows the strength of their bond. The problem is, much like a song you listen to endlessly, it starts to lose its appeal because you get burnt out through overexposure. In this moment, that's exactly how I started to feel about these photos, although that's just a minor criticism amongst an onslaught of top-tier writing. Aubrey gets overcome with emotion and runs back to Mari's tree stump, and everyone else pursues. It's here that Aubrey explains the rationale behind her actions, that Basil covered all the precious photos, their memories, with a black marker. Overwhelmed with anger, she immediately judged the flower boy and started to bully him, not taking the time to understand why he would do such a thing. This applies to her viewpoint on everyone present as well. All her friends were struggling to deal with Mari's death in their own way, and she felt abandoned by them, deciding to antagonize and push them further away. However, Aubrey isn't to blame here. Neither is Kel for being afraid he might make things worse, or Hiro for not being the mature adult they all thought of him as. They were all just kids, trying to deal with this immense pain in their own way, not having the strength to support themselves, yet alone anyone else. Although I think each of them realizes the folly in their actions. They all tried to go at it alone, never once realizing that when you can't handle something by yourself, it's okay to rely on others. Sure, they may all be broken messes, but it's the strength they derive from each other that allows them to pick up those pieces, even if they don't all fit exactly as they did before. As the friends embrace in an awkward but charming hug, a promise is made. This time, they won't abandon each other. The road hasn't been easy, and there certainly were some stumbles along the way, but they got there eventually. This may sound a little cheesy, but hey, comments like these always do. They've argued, yelled at each other, and even come to blows, but they're past. The memories they all hold dear proved far stronger than what drove them apart. I think Mari would be proud. All of this is beautiful, wonderful, heartwarming, charming, whatever other adjective I can think of, but there were 6 members of this group of friends, and only one of them has passed on. The problem is, only 4 are currently present, and if the behavior of the guy in question is any indication, he could really use a friend or 4 right now. So that's what the group decides to do. They pay old Basil a visit, except he doesn't want to leave his room, probably still reeling from the death of his grandmother. This is frustrating for everyone, most of all Aubrey, who very much so wants to apologize for her actions, but they made a promise to always support one another, and they aren't going to break that so quickly. Basil may not want to leave his room now, but when he is ready, they'll be there, deciding to even stay the night to ensure this event occurs. Before I move on to what the future entails for Sunny and the gang, I want to give a few comments on all of Day 3. I've mostly been trying to explain what happens in the most profound and emotion-inducing way I can, attempting to put into words the powerful feelings you'll experience while playing through it. I haven't been giving my thoughts that much, but I think you can get an accurate image based on how I chose to describe each scene. Day 3 is absolutely phenomenal. So much has been building towards the reunification of the Dreamworld crew. Each day we get one extra member until it's rounded off with the recruitment of Aubrey. It's ironic how the person most willing to join up with Sunny in Headspace is the last person to join the party. What makes this day special, and really the game, are the little details. If you ignore all the side content, all you do is get Aubrey, visit the treehouse, and then sleep over at Basil's. Of course there's more meaning behind those events than just what that simple list conveys, but the point is, the real strength of the day is all the hangout spots, visiting Mari's grave, etc. You're going to be emotionally invested in the group reuniting and agreeing to never break apart again, no matter what. It's these scenes that supplement all that and turn something amazing into a true masterclass of writing, with each one tugging at your heartstrings just a little more, making the big finale at the tree have even greater impact. Of course, the treehouse being Neighbor's room and Aubrey's big speech shouldn't be discredited. They're moving scenes that stand out as some of the strongest moments in any game I've ever played. Suffice to say, the third day was fantastic. With that brief intermission out of the way, Sunny yet again, much like every time he goes to sleep, awakens in white space. Only this time, he isn't encasing himself in Omori. If there's one thing everything that just transpired communicated to the shut-in, it's that his friends are here to support him. Now that's nothing new for us. Kel, Aubrey, and Hiro have been helping us out the whole game, but for Sunny, reconnecting with his friends has stirred something in him. He's been living in limbo for the past 4 years, barely leaving his bed, yet alone going outside and interacting with people, living in an an endless cycle of repression. Whitespace directly tells us that he's been living there for as long as he can remember. The boy has forgotten what it's like to live. This unhealthy period of stasis has become all he knows. So when Kel knocks on his door and Sunny steps foot outside for the first time in what probably felt like an eternity, it's his first step toward healing, towards facing the truth. Being exposed to his past, his friends, and the town he lives in, Sunny slowly grows stronger. I mean, Omori had to step in and stop him from facing the truth when it bubbled up to the surface like it had so many times before. It's the events of this day that pushed Sunny over the edge, hanging out with his friends just like in his dreams, all of them facing Mari's death together, and then the promise they'll always be there to support each other are the final nails in the coffin. Sunny decides that enough is enough, and it's time for a change. He's finally experienced what it's like to live again, and this time he isn't going to give it up. But the only way for him to do that is to face what's been plaguing him. So he gathers his courage, grabs that black light bulb, the embodiment of his repression, and smashes it to pieces, finally facing the truth. Yet nobody said it was going to be easy. Sunny is going to have to pull out all the stops in order to win this fight. Luckily for him, with a little aid from his big sis, he's learned a couple coping mechanisms. It's not just his friends that have given Sunny strength, but the fears he's learned to overcome. The fight even briefly calls back to them, helping the boy strengthen his mental fortitude for what's about to be unveiled. The initial image is a blurred mess, demonstrating Sunny's hesitance and fear. However, there's only one path ahead, and that's forward. Taking a moment to calm himself, he focuses, bringing some clarity to the image, revealing Mari's corpse swaying away. This revelation threatens to overwhelm Sunny. He fears for his life, has his heart beat out of his chest, but throughout all that he persists, knowing that in order to move on, the boy must defeat this foe. Eventually, he starts to calm down. He steadies himself, and his breathing returns to normal. Yet again, he gathers himself for one final push, finally learning how to overcome. With this last hurdle passed over, there's nothing stopping Sunny from digging into the lowest depths of his mind and confronting what's been tormenting him all this time. The way Omori goes about revealing the truth is extraordinary. Everything starts off with a single image of a tree. It doesn't really mean much, but wait, we'll get there. Dream Basil thanks you for finally coming to rescue him, giving you some final words of encouragement before apologizing for something. We've seen this before, and the title seems to be communicating that Basil is involved with whatever it is that happened. Perhaps he's even the one responsible for all the trauma to begin with. Regardless, he hands you a corrupted dark version of his photo album. Apparently, there are going to be more of these images. In fact, the entire story of the truth is told in this way. Basil's involvement is confirmed right away, with him appearing directly in the next photo. From here, you enter a large hospital room with a patient lying in every bed. They seem to be breathing just fine. Maybe everything will be okay. Then as you slowly gather each photo, it's revealed with more and more clarity that this unknown patient is in fact Mari. The photo showing Sunny crying over the girl while she lays in bed. With each photograph collected, more Maris disappear until the patient flatlines, revealing that she's no longer breathing. Everything is not okay. There isn't much time to think about it though as you're transported to the top of a familiar set of stairs. Sunny travels down, the images mirroring his descent. You'll notice the protagonist's ear has gone red at this point, and as you travel further down and reveal more photographs, this only seems to spread. Reaching the bottom, you find yet another image, only instead of you being there, Mari is, and she doesn't look so good. You're yet again teleported, this time back to your room, or at least what appears to be. There are 2 beds, and one of the inhabitants isn't breathing. At this point, that initial red splotch has progressed, infecting half your face, morphing it into some ghoulish abomination. Sunny picks up another photo and dashes out of the room. Transported once again, now you're in some odd black void, but that doesn't matter, there are pictures to collect after all. Each image further morphing Sunny's appearance until it starts to alter his entire body. He becomes bloodied, leaving a trail with every step. Even at this point, the player isn't 100% certain how Mari died. We see a photo of Basil's hands in the background of Sunny mourning his sister, implying one last time that maybe he was responsible. You see her limp body at the bottom of the stairs, and the flower boy has been apologizing to us for a while now. It must have been Basil that pushed her down. That's why he's so guilt-ridden. We're so traumatized because our best friend killed our sister and we stood by and did nothing. Wait, why is Sunny's violin at the bottom of the stairs? Why are we standing there with our sister still clearly alive? There has to be some kind of mistake. This can't be right. When I first saw the photographs leading up to this, my reaction was something similar. I desperately didn't want Sunny to be responsible for his sister's death. I kept thinking, no way, this just can't be true. Something so awful shouldn't be allowed to happen. But as I further progressed and gathered more of the pictures, there was simply no denying it. For me, the truth was painful. Just watching as a mere bystander caused me a great amount of distress. How could everything be okay? How do you rectify this act? How can one possibly overcome something so appalling? The human psyche simply isn't meant to face this level of cruelty. It's too much. It's just too much. If I, a person who is far removed with no fear of this affecting him, felt this way, then just imagine how Sunny must feel. Just looking at what he becomes, how he sees himself, is a clear enough indication. He hates himself, despises his own existence for what he did. His sister, who was always there for him, the one who loved her little brother with every fiber of her being. When Sunny started drowning, it wasn't the people in the water who reached him first, but the panicking older sibling that was still on land. You want to know the worst part? Sunny knows all this. He knows how much his sister loved him. He knows how much Hiro loved her. He knows how much Aubrey looked up to her. He knows how the sun truly did shine brighter when she was around, and he took all that away. Why did he do this? Because he was tired of playing the violin. It was encroaching on his precious little Saturday morning cartoons. His sister and him were supposed to play a recital that day. All she cared about was everything being perfect. Couldn't she see how upset he was? How this hobby had become the bane of his existence? Not being able to chat with everyone about the final act of the show. That's what Mari died over. Something so utterly pointless. Sunny is scum. No, worse than scum. Lower than the worms inside the dirt. Now, before people start raising their pitchforks, I don't personally believe any of what I just said. As tragic as it is, sometimes we can't control our emotions, and we lash out, especially when you're 12 years old. It's just that Sunny's moment of weakness happened to have monumental repercussions. It was an accident. He just pushed her in the one location, the one spot that would alter his life forever. If only he had pushed her away or in the opposite direction. Sure, Mari might have scolded him or even gotten a little hurt, but at the end of the day, life would have moved on. The two would have made up and gone on to live their normal lives. In the past, whenever I've done something terrible, these only if thoughts permeate my mind. I wish with every fiber of my being that I could just go back and stop myself, make it so that event is forever erased from history. However, the world is cruel, and no matter how badly you may will it, you can't go back. You can't change what's already occurred, and the only option is to face forward and deal with the consequences. I'm no psychologist, but I can imagine Sunny going through something similar, telling himself it was an accident. This isn't what he wanted. This isn't fair. It's not right. There's no way this should ever be allowed to happen. Except it did happen, and those repercussions aren't going anywhere. He can't cope with the fact that he was the one who killed his sister. Heck, Basil can't even deal with it, and he wasn't even the one who killed her, believing something behind Sunny performed the act. So the two take the only route they can, neither willing to let Sunny take the fall. Basil comes up with the idea to fake her death as a suicide, and the boys hang her from a tree, forever traumatized by their actions. The reveal that Sunny is responsible for his sister's death is done perfectly. I don't think they could have done a better job. The player is thrown for a loop. I wouldn't say Basil is a villainous character, but he certainly acts as an antagonistic force for Sunny, being associated with the darkness of the dream world, him destroying their memories, and his constant apologizing. It wouldn't be a stretch to think perhaps he was the one who killed Mari, only for the rug to be swept out from under you, revealing in horrifying fashion that it was you all along. I don't typically project myself onto silent protagonists, but I think anyone would feel the way I mentioned before. You may not see yourself as Sunny, but you still feel incredibly uncomfortable knowing he was the one who killed Mari. That raw emotion is part of why this game is so amazing. I've seen plenty of tragedies in various different works, characters sobbing over the death of a loved one or companion, but nothing has ever hit me like this. I've never felt such pain myself. I directly experienced what Sunny must have felt, even if it was only a fraction of it. Further adding to this dark feeling is the boy's slow transformation into the ghoulish version he sees himself as. You aren't told through some message or dialogue option the depth of Sunny's self-deprecation. Just look at that disgusting, monstrous face, his reflection in the mirror. That's all you need to see in order to tell what the boy thinks of himself. I could keep going on. The order of the photos, the symbolism of the patient no longer breathing coinciding with Sunny realizing his sister is dead, the music and general sound utilized, but I think you get the idea. This was perfect. With the revelation of what has been tormenting Sunny all this time brought into the open, the boy awakens. It's the middle of the night, and the music sounds like alarms blaring in the background. You have a couple choices here that lead to various different endings. All involve how you choose to have Sunny react to the truth. He can run all the way back home, too overwhelmed by guilt to ever believe his friends could forgive him. Another has him going straight back to bed, but this ends with Basil killing himself. Sunny, having faced the truth, knows why Basil chose to do what he did. This knowledge acts as a curse. Him killing Mari has yet another consequence. The death of his best friend. Unable to face the partial blame for another one of his loved ones dying, Sunny dives further into himself, erasing Basil's room from his mind. Aubrey blames her bullying for Basil's suicide, and the rest of the group is brought to a new low. They were finally reconnecting and picking up the pieces of the past they left behind. Now yet another tragedy has struck, and it's uncertain whether their friendship can withstand the death of two friends. Both of these endings aren't particularly satisfying, so let's jump into what the game thankfully calls the true ending. Instead of running away or ignoring this revelation, you can have the protagonist face it. The first step of this being confronting Basil. Now that the player knows the truth, the game demonstrates just how unhinged the flower boy has become. He's ecstatic to see his best friend, but is equally enraged by the cruelty of the situation. Sunny finally leaves his house only for him to move away a few days later, leaving Basil to yet again deal with this immense guilt all on his own. Except the flower boy has had enough. He's been suffering by himself for so long with the only other person he could talk to abandoning him, this time for good. With this mixture of happiness, anger, and overwhelming guilt, Basil becomes deranged, unwilling to let Sunny run away this time, and forcing him to face what his actions have done to him. In this crazed state, Basil rationalizes all of Sunny's terrible actions just like he did before. Sunny is a good person, his best friend. He can't be responsible. Something behind him is, and Basil's going to get rid of it once and for all. The fight against Basil is less an actual battle, and more a story sequence. You can try to calm down and perform all of Sunny's usual tactics, but he's too panic-stricken for anything to work, eventually leading to a brawl between two friends. Basil rationalizes his actions as trying to help Sunny, but he's really taking his anger out on the boy, most likely attempting to murder him, although just how far the flower boy is trying to go is up for debate. Having anyone, yet alone your friend, violently assaulting you would cause anyone a strong amount of distress, but it's made only worse by Sunny knowing he's at least partially responsible for how Basil is. He can't use his self-induced ignorance as a shield anymore. Eventually, Sunny is overwhelmed, and his animalistic fight-or-flight instincts kick in. Basil may very well kill him, and he needs to do everything he can to survive. The battle is an uncomfortable emotional mess that you can't look away from. The tone is set perfectly, with this distorted humming playing in the background, getting louder and louder as the fight goes on, eventually transforming into the deep tolling of bells in the distance. Basil's dialogue asking Sunny if he's selfish for this, showing that underneath all the crazed lunacy, he is somewhat aware of what his actions mean. All of your coping mechanisms disappear one by one as the encounter proves too much to handle. You feel helpless, not wanting to hurt Basil, but left with no other choice. It's a fantastic combination of video game mechanics and narrative punches, utilizing the game itself to further put the player inside the head of Sunny as he slowly loses all sense of himself. In the end, it's just an all-out desperate brawl between the two, and you feel that. The screen goes completely black and white, only shifting to a dark crimson when inflicting damage, further enveloping you in the emotionality of it all. Both of your health bars slowly deplete with each blow until Basil lands a critical hit. The screen and music slowly fade away as Sunny loses consciousness, with the only sound being his quickened heartbeat pulsating in the background. Much like every time the edgy teen is knocked out cold, we're greeted with some rendition of the protagonist's subconscious. For some reason, you're inside some dreamscape version of Faraway Town, but don't fret, everything will be explained in dear time. Sunny makes his way home, and a familiar figure stands outside a house we know all too well. This is the first and only time we get a look at who Basil really is. Not some conjuration of Sunny's mind or anxiety-ridden lunatic, but the real man himself. Even some of the portraits are utilized for the first time. The words spoken here are ones of hope. The flower boy starts out grim, focusing on the tragedy that befell both of them, but the darkness has finally been lifted, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel if Sunny chooses to follow it. No matter how bleak things may get, your friends will always be there to support you. Even though Sunny and Basil have committed an irreversible act that sent all their lives into turmoil, the two of them have to believe they are redeemable, that they are worthy of redemption. In his big speech, Basil lays all this out to Sunny in a far more concise and heartwarming manner than my word salad self is capable of, telling Sunny that that these photos aren't just that. They're everyone's precious memories with each other, proof of the bond that they share. They have to believe in that bond. While I'm sure Basil wants Sunny to let go of his guilt, that decision isn't up to him. Sunny has to decide for himself, so having played his role, he gives his best friend one final hug before exiting off screen, demonstrating the same level of trust for Sunny that the rest of the group has. I've given every single character of the main cast a moment to shine in this video with one exception. I think now is a good time to put the spotlight on him. Basil truly is the best friend a guy could ask for. He never once gives up on Sunny, having absolute faith in him, not willing to accept that it was him who killed his sister. It wasn't even Basil who destroyed his photo album. It was Sunny who drew all over it with black marker. Aubrey bullied him for this, but Basil still didn't relent, rationalizing that this couldn't possibly be Sunny's fault and taking the fall. The flower boy is depicted in a negative light for so long. The stranger takes his form, guiding Sunny towards the darkness of the truth time and time again. The bathroom scene depicting him as the nutcase that Aubrey says he is. But Basil doesn't deserve this. He's a wonderful human being who wholeheartedly devoted himself to his friends long after all of them had abandoned him. As much as this scene is a beautiful speech about how Sunny needs to have faith in his bonds, it also gives justice to Basil, acknowledging that through it all, Basil was the best friend a guy could ask for. With this beautiful scene coming to a close, Sunny heads inside. On the surface, there doesn't appear to be much going on inside the house besides it being fully decorated like it was in the past. You can go straight into the now visible closet, unlock the toy box, pick up Sunny's broken violin, and head out. But there's so much more inside this small area. The player can examine every piece of furniture, and Sunny will provide a little narration about what memories he has with it. Many of them focus on Mari, who can even speak to you one final time in her piano room. However, there are also little details about the siblings' mother and father as well. Whenever writing a story, a lot of authors will tell you the devil is in the details. What appear to be tiny, insignificant factors are what always make a story come to life. Just walking around Sunny's home and reading about all the memories he has with each piece of furniture adds so much depth to the area and the characters. You can see the history of each item and how they relate to Sunny's home life, like how the cutting board reminds the boy of the first time he saw Mari cry, or how he broke a vase and she covered for him. This house feels like you could actually walk into it, that the people inhabiting it are real, each with a complex life of their own. This isn't the only time Omori pulls a stunt like this either. There's so much symbolism in this game. For instance, all these pinwheels scattered around the town, each one represents one of the members of the group of 6. White being Sunny, purple Mari, blue Hero, orange Kel, green Basil, and pink Aubrey. You can find each one outside of their homes. In their old hangout spot, the purple and green ones are off to the side, but all the others are grouped together. I think we all know what that symbolizes. However, when viewing a past memory, you can see them all huddled together. During the second nightmare sequence, you can see a tangled mess of hair at the foot of the stairs, representing Mari's corpse. There's also a dark version of the closet door that Sunny has mentally blocked out from his mind. You can again briefly see this door after watching Hero cry over Mari's piano as well. Speaking of the piano, the name inscribed on it is Omori. If you look at the character model of the guy in question, you can see he's dressed like a piano, with his top representing the main body and his shorts serving as the keys. There's so much love and care put into this game. Most players will never take the time to recognize all of these tiny details, but for those of us that do, it adds a whole other layer of appreciation for the developers. They really outdid themselves. Okay, we're nearly at the end here, so how about I shut up for 5 seconds and move on with the plot? I swear with how much I talk, I'm a bigger obstacle to progression than anything else. As I said before, Sunny grabs the violin he smashed all those years ago and heads out, only now we're on some strange highway. If you take the time to save here, you'll notice this place is called Memory Lane. That's because you get to act out most of the scenes featured in the photo album. I won't be going into detail about every single scene here, it's not really necessary. What I will point out is these scenes have actually showed up before, although very vaguely. You get hints of their dialogue when being led to the barn by the stranger all the way back in Otherworld. What this means is Sunny didn't just repress his sister's death, but all the happy memories he had with his friends. That's why the photo album featured in the dream world is so much smaller. Sunny forgot just how strong the deep connection he forged with his friends truly was. However, the events of day 3 and the viewing of all their old memories finally manages to wake him up. That he isn't alone. He has people to support him. Watching all of these moments yet again hits the point home that this friend group was special. There's so much charm and personality amongst the simple everyday interaction they all had. You see the flirty, playful nature the older members had, the friendly animosity between Kel and Aubrey, and the friendship between Basil and Sunny, with him even teasing the boy over his crush on Aubrey. Whenever you look at an old photo, or any kind of memento, it's not just the moment captured that comes to mind, it's the entire event itself. The people you spoke to, what the weather was like, the mood you were in. This is what makes these photos those memories, and the player gets to experience that. To an outsider, the images look sweet and heartwarming, but here you get the whole story. You get to see what made everyone sit down and realize just how special what they had was, what everyone was really thinking about whenever gazing at Basil's photo album. With each memory viewed, a little piece of the violin mends back together until it's good as new. With a now functioning instrument, Sonny makes his way towards that recital he never got to perform, except there's one final pit stop, a group of 3 children standing in a formation we've become all too accustomed to. Aubrey, Kel, and Hero. The friends you've spent the whole game with are here to give Sonny some final words of encouragement. A small detail I really like is the 3 of them are modeled after their old childhood selves we just saw. Their basic low-detailed Dreamworld versions are nowhere to be seen, symbolizing the fog shrouding the true strength of their bond having disappeared. There have been a lot of emotional moments in Omori. You've laughed, been disturbed, unsettled, smiled like a fool, and perhaps even cried. But this right here is one of the sweetest things I've ever experienced. Sonny has been living in tormented isolation for 4 long years. The weight behind what he did too much for him to bear, but it's here where his friends tell him that he needs to move on. He needs to find the strength within himself to overcome this. Let's face it, Sonny has always been weak. He's always been the baby of the group that they all took care of, but this time, he's taking the lead, choosing to find the courage within himself. But taking the lead doesn't mean you have to do it all on your own. You have people in your life who are willing to support you, not out of some moral obligation, but because they care about you. They want you to be happy because your happiness is their happiness. They love you and will always have your back. You may have done something terrible, and your actions may have caused irreversible damage to those you love, but that doesn't make you irredeemable. You may never be able to undo the past, but one of the greatest things about life is it's never too late to find redemption. There's always hope, and that's what this scene epitomizes. Your friends won't abandon you. They'll be there for you and accept you for what you've done, but you have to find it in your heart to forgive yourself first. With some final parting words, Sonny readies his sheet music and starts to play. Except there's someone we've been forgetting about. Someone who won't let Sonny just move on. Someone who embodies all the self-loathing, guilt, and hatred Sonny has built up all these years. The puppet who we claim we've outgrown, only now we're going to have to prove it. The boss fight against Omori is without a doubt one of the best final bosses in any game ever. I've spent so much time racking my brain on how to perfectly bring to life every scene, every moment, and every emotion I felt while playing, to perfectly articulate just what Omori means to me. However, it's here where I know that no matter how much I stew and rewatch this fight, that I'll never do it justice. But that doesn't mean I can't try. The first thing I think that will strike you is the extreme amount of emotion in the battle music. Omori has had some stunning tracks, but this one is packed with so much feeling. There's an unbearable sadness that threatens to bury you underneath all the pain. The perfect track for what's about to unfold. The fight starts out simple enough, a classic brawl between your two selves, but once Omori starts speaking to you, everything changes. You come to understand the darkness Sonny has been carrying even further. I think we all have that voice in the back of our minds that tells us we're no good, that we're not as great as we think we are. Every accomplishment and good deed we've racked up pales in comparison to all the harm we may have caused. That reminds us of all the bad actions we've committed throughout our lives. Those intrusive thoughts that tell us that the lowest version of ourselves is who we really are. The shapes they may take depend on the circumstances of our lives, but we all have them. The difference typically being whether we give them any credence. Some of us are stronger than others, and we aren't always able to beat back the onslaught of our own self-deprecation and inferiority. I think that's what Omori truly represents. As the battle progresses, the words the creation says pack more and more bite, revealing all the things Sonny hates about himself. How he relies on his friends for everything, never doing anything for himself or others. How can he say that he cares about them when he locks himself in his room for 4 years after being the one who caused all their suffering? Basil covered for him for 4 years, and the only thing he has to show for it are the scars of his overwhelming guilt. He helped you, and you turned your back on him. Hero lost the love of his life, and a year of his life to his depression. He may never find love again. Aubrey lost the person she looked up to the most, and her entire support network. She probably even had feelings for you. Heck, you had feelings for her, and you abandoned her. her. The entire collapse of your friend group is your fault. The reason why those photos have been reduced to mere memories instead of reality is because of you. Sunny is a selfish monster who only thinks about himself. He does nothing for others, so in turn he earns nothing. Even him hoping that his friends will forgive him is an insult to all the pain he's caused. When they find out the truth, they'll hate him just as much as he hates himself, and he'll deserve every ounce of scorn they show him. People like him don't deserve to live. People like him are sick freaks whose only purpose in life is to be put 6 feet under. He deserves to die. Yet, throughout this verbal bombardment, there's a tiny glimmer of hope. Hope that despite all of these accusations, Sunny is indeed still redeemable. That despite his inaction and all the pain he may have caused, it's not too late to right those wrongs. That Omori is wrong. That Sunny does care about his friends. He cherishes them just as much as they cherish him. That he isn't sick, and that he may have made some mistakes, but he can still make up for them. He can overcome all his pain, self-loathing, and guilt. But like I said before, Sunny is weak, and he can't do it alone. Thankfully, he doesn't have to. Even now, he has his friends. The seeds of hope these 3 days have left him with blossom and protect him against Omori, pushing him further and further than even the boy thought possible. All their wishes, hopes, and dreams. That friends stand by each other, and when things get tough, they come together as one. Only, it isn't enough. And no matter how many times Sunny beats him back, Omori will not succumb, his guilt and own self-hatred proving just too powerful. I hope I was able to capture even a fraction of what makes this fight so amazing. Yet again, this isn't a mechanically interesting fight with complex strategies and party tactics. It's mostly you just spamming the same 4 skills over and over again. With that being said, the gameplay of this fight still adds something. You constantly feel like you're fighting an uphill battle. Omori is far more powerful than you, being able to eliminate half your health bar with just one move. You're constantly trying to maintain just enough health so you can get some attacks in, with the combination of Encore and Allegro working so well in tandem, forcing you to carefully plan out when you go on the offensive so you always feel like you're losing. The change in the background to the throne room, and Omori becoming more and more distorted as the fight goes on, highlights his true dark image. The haunting violin even distorts into unrecognizable electronic static. I've talked about other scenes in battles evoking emotion from the player, but nothing ever comes close to this. The words the shell throws at you pack a vicious bite. I don't blame Sunny for what happened, and I don't think most of what Omori says is true, but you can't help but feel there's a kernel of truth to some of the things he's saying, only making everything even worse. Although throughout all of it, Sunny is still fighting, and whenever you use Cherish, you can't help but have your heart warmed, to feel the love in every statement, knowing that despite it all, his friends will accept him. It's here that you're given one final choice. You can choose to give in and receive the bad ending where Sunny jumps off a hospital roof to his death, or you can choose to carry on. I think we all know what route I'm taking. Battered and beaten, Sunny collapses, but he still hasn't had enough. He won't let everything his friends have done for him, all the strides he's made, be for nothing. He will not succumb. Resolutely, Sunny readies his violin and begins to play. If you're wondering where this strength came from, you need only look toward the screen in front of you. This final highlight reel showcases what has allowed Sunny to make it this far, what fuels him to overcome this obstacle. You yet again, for one final time, get to see how much Omori loved her brother, how the friend group slowly came to be, and how the 6 of them created a connection that would stay with them forever. At this point, I'm starting to sound like a Kingdom Hearts character with all the friends are my power BS, but take a moment to really think about this group. How many people in your life do you feel 100% fully have your back no matter what? Sure, a lot of people have friends they're really close with, but are you comfortable telling them anything? Do you feel so safe with them that you're positive they'll always at least hear you out? That they won't pass judgment because your trust in each other is just that strong? I think a lot of people don't have this. They don't have a confidant outside of maybe their parents who they can always rely on to provide that warmth and acceptance. Even the people that do rarely have an entire group that they can rely on. I've been saying what these kids have is special for a while now, but this is what I mean. That acceptance, love, and care for someone that isn't yourself. The product of an immeasurable amount of time spent nurturing a relationship relationship with someone until being in each other's presence is as natural to you as drawing a breath. This is what the cast has, and Omori perfectly articulates that. After Sunny's deep inner struggle, he awakens in a hospital bed, surrounded by flowers. So much has happened over the last section of the game, but this moment really got me. After having just finished an arduous confrontation, being bombarded with all the things Sunny subconsciously hates about himself, all his weaknesses and deepest regrets, and the boy awakens to a room filled with the thoughts and prayers of all the people he helped over the course of the game. These flowers and small words prove that Omori is wrong about Sunny, that the boy isn't an irredeemable monster that only thinks about himself, that he doesn't just lean on people and provide nothing in return. He may have killed Mari, something he can never make up for, but just look at what he managed to accomplish in just 3 days. The amount of people whose lives he impacted to such a degree that they felt it necessary to send him flowers. All the small little messages with each reminding you of the time you spent with these characters. This scene may not compare to some of the previous moments, and it's not as if it's challenging to put a few flowers in a room, but I just love what it represents. From here, the boy travels down to Basil's hospital room, opens the door, looks each of his friends in the eyes, and says one sentence: "I have something to tell you." Then, the game ends. You don't get a nice happy scene showing the friends forgiving him and telling him everything is going to be fine. And that's okay. Sunny being forgiven by his friends isn't what the game is about. The purpose has always been Sunny's journey to confronting the truth and finding the ability to forgive himself for what he has done. How can he begin to ask for the forgiveness of others when he believes in his own heart that he doesn't deserve it? Plus, with the theme of friendship and the words all your friends leave you with, it would pretty much go against the whole main theme of friendship conquers all if they decided to just abandon Sunny forever. That would ruin all of Day 3, and especially all the promises and best wishes your friends gave you. So I personally believe that it's not even a question whether his friends will forgive him or not. So at that final point, this just about concludes everything that happens during Omori. There is another route called the Hikikomori route, but most of it is exactly the same, with only a minor continuation of the dream world and some added super bosses. The main story and entire purpose of the narrative is all resolved in the true route, hence the name, so I won't be going into much detail on the other. What I will say about it is I think it takes the combat of Omori and actually does something with it to make it more enjoyable. The perfect heart fight is easily the most challenging battle in the entire game and is a blast trying to overcome. I also enjoyed the boss rush mode and some of the other super bosses like Abby and Pluto. Even the puzzle boss of Mutant Heart was a nice change of pace. I wish the game had actually incorporated these more challenging and puzzle-oriented elements into gameplay. Looking at standard encounters, every enemy in the game is handled in the exact same way. You mostly just spam standard attacks or skill if you're feeling adventurous. This isn't exactly uncommon in JRPGs, and it's more of a problem with the genre, but Omori doesn't do anything to circumvent it. I mostly just spammed Omori's attack again follow-up, and emotions didn't matter at all for these encounters. The energy system is also pretty underwhelming. Regular battles don't have your party getting hit enough to warrant their use, and even then the only ones worth using in these situations are attack again, or Hero and Kel dunking on foes. You would think energy would be more important during boss battles, but this simply isn't true. To even use them, you have to perform a normal attack, and once you get past Space Ex-Boyfriend, skills are all you'll be using every turn. The utility they provide aren't greater than the variety of abilities the party has, so the only time you ever end up using energy is when the bar fills up to 10, allowing for the big final group attack. This also disincentivizes their use because the sheer amount of damage this attack does far outweighs anything the other follow-ups can accomplish. Basically, energy becomes an almost worthless resource except when reaching its limit for most of the game, making most follow-up attacks pretty pointless to begin with. The emotion system is interesting, but the way bosses and skills are designed make it so you only have to use one strategy to overcome most fights in the game. I already spoke about the happy strategy, so I won't go into detail here. This turns every fight into the same battle, where you're spamming the exact same abilities. Even the attacks most bosses use don't require you to switch tactics besides maybe using a few items. I will give credit where credit is due though, I still found all these battles to be enjoyable. The presentation used was just phenomenal. Between the excellent art style and stunning music, it was hard not to enjoy these brawls, even if they were extremely repetitive, not requiring much thought to win. The other biggest criticism is the overall pace of the game. Most of the dream world doesn't have anything to do with, well, anything really. It's just nonsensical, whimsical fun for hours on end. Yet again, these sections are by no means bad. I had a great deal of fun running through them and their crazy antics, but eventually I did grow a little tired of them. Combine this with standard enemy encounters not being particularly engaging, and it does get a little worse. I know there are explanations as to why Sunny dreams up each section. Otherworld is based on the comics he read, and Mr. Jossum is inspired by the blackjack game on his computer. That's all great and even a welcome inclusion, but the problem still remains that they have nothing to do with the narrative. narrative, putting the player in plot limbo for a substantial portion of the game. An example of how this could have been improved is having each area link back to Sunny's trauma in some way. Perhaps Sunny's dad acquired a gambling addiction due to Mari's death, and this had a negative effect on his home life. I'm just spitballing here, but the point is the dream world could have been better integrated into the plot, not just have vague references to some of the toys Sunny played with when he was a kid. With those two criticisms out of the way, all I have left are some closing remarks. The story featured in Omori is one of the best in any game I've ever played. Very few titles have ever invoked such a strong level of emotion out of me. Just watching back the footage and listening to the music managed to make me emotional, serving as a true testament to just how well done Omori is. I loved playing this game, and I think anyone who enjoys a quality narrative would as well. The theme of friendship is really overdone nowadays, but Omori manages to capture what so many other forms of media fail to. It understands at its core what makes a strong group of friends so powerful, that being there for each other when it counts, and having faith in one another is what the theme is all about. Plenty of shows, movies, and games get this as well, but Omori makes you understand how the connection was built. You see them laughing, crying, fighting, and supporting one another. They all face real problems that many of us have experienced, and through relying on one another, they not only overcome them, but rekindle their connection along the way. These aren't just fictional characters, they're people who you can relate to and root for. Then there's the amazing quality of detail put into everything. All the symbolism, the hangout spots, the little stories associated with an object, the history everyone has with each other. It adds so much to an already amazing story. Let's not forget the music, art style, and imagery as well. All of these elements are fundamental to setting the tone of a game, and Omori consistently knocks it out of the park. The tracks in this game are phenomenal, never failing to perfectly encapsulate the atmosphere around a scene. The art style may be simple, but it's so effective, especially when used during the horror elements, invoking raw anxiety from any who play the game. Then there's how the game mixes story and gameplay to further engross you in a scene. The Omori boss fight does this so well, making Sunny's strength feel insignificant to the overwhelming power of his other half, causing the player to further feel the desperate struggle to overcome his guilt. This is also done through some of the horror elements. Choosing to cut open Miwo haunts you. The game makes you feel like you have no other option, but is your progression more important than this cat's life? You may hesitate, with each yes more difficult than the next, pleading with the game, hoping something will happen in between each affirmation, revealing when you finally do open the cat that the whole exercise was pointless. You're the one that had to die all along. Having said all that, I hope I managed to capture even a fraction of what makes this game so amazing. Just a smidge of the emotion this game will make you feel. If that's the case, then I can say that the goal of this video has been achieved. Omori certainly isn't flawless, with some pacing and gameplay issues, but it makes up for all of its shortcomings, making it a true narrative marvel. So this final section is meant to be a great big thanks from me, to show you that I really appreciate you watching the video until the end. Every content creator wants to see people enjoying their videos. If you made it this far, I hope I managed to achieve that. If you did enjoy the video, I ask that you subscribe, leave a like, or a comment on your thoughts of my thoughts. It really helps a small channel grow. Alright, well, thanks again, and I hope to see you again.